Hi, welcome. Thanks for joining us. I'm Nick Bonner with treestuff.com. I'm here with Rich Hattier, ISC. Rich, thanks for coming. We literally just first time we've seen each other in.
It's been a while.
It's been a while. So yeah, we haven't greeted each other yet today, so this is definitely the first time. So yeah, good to see you. Rich is going to do a webinar for us. Rich, what are you going to talk about today? Tell us a little bit.
Well, Nick, we've got quite a few things going on. Depending on the time, this is a new format for me, so I'm not totally sure what we're all going to get to. But we're going to focus on a couple key things, primarily the topic of arboriculture as an industry. And then we're going to get into planning for safety. We're going to show numerous different aerial rescue techniques, and also preparing yourself to be rescued in a tree, and just thinking safety all along.
Awesome. Very excited. Well, I'll be in and out during your presentation. I think you're going to use me later as a dummy.
Yes, sir.
I'm extremely experienced in that, so I'll be very good at that. We also have some giveaways planned for tonight.
Perfect.
So make sure you don't forget that. We'll be waving at you from off screen and piping in your ear. We also have the CEUs at the end. So there will be 3 CEUs if you pass the test. We do everything we can to make that accessible and to fit into the ISA guidelines, so huge thanks to them for partnering with us on this and helping us provide the CEUs. The link will come out at the end of the test, and you'll have a couple of days to submit that and get a passing score. So I think that's it. Did I forget anything, Carson or Cale? No? Big thanks to the Royer brothers. Just as we start this off, Carson and Cale are manning the production side of all this, and their smarts make all this stuff possible. So
Yeah, perfect.
big thanks to those guys. Rich, take it away.
Excellent.
I'm going to go back
Cheers.
to the booth, okay? I'll be in a little bit.
I'll need you in a bit. Excellent. All right, well, thank you very much for joining us for this webinar. Again, you'll have to bear with me a little bit in terms of usually we get some nice audience interaction, which clearly we can't do here. So I'm just going to start talking. One advantage to this is you can't throw anything at me, hopefully. So anyone who's sat in any of my classes before knows that I've got a tendency to talk and talk and talk and never shut up. Really, you're going to have to cut the power to get me off this time. I've got you at my mercy. So what I'd like to start with, well, first of all, just an introduction. My name is Rich Hattier. I'm the North American Sales Manager for ISC. We're a company based out of North Wales. We are an industrial heights gear manufacturer. We deal strictly with industrial gear. We don't do any recreational products. We do all of our manufacturing in-house. We've got hot forging, cold forging, CNC, all of it. So it's a very interesting and fun group to work with. In fact, if you've ever used one of these, a figure 8, well, the inventor of that figure 8 is Denny Morehouse, who would be the boss of the owner of my company. So very pleased to be invited here. I want to thank Tree Stuff for having us up. The weather's been reasonably nice outside. I had some ice earlier, but luckily managed to avoid it. So let's just get into it. I mentioned that we're going to talk a little bit of philosophy here, and probably put a lot of people off, a few people off, hopefully not. Because the key is we are a technical height discipline in arboriculture. We have a very unique work environment that is completely different than every other height work environment out there. So because of that, we have to focus on safety in a different way than some of these other heights deal with. Case in point, every other height discipline, whether it be wind turbines, whether it be tower climbing, rope access, always when they're working aloft, they are working with rated anchors. And as you probably well know, when we're looking at a tree back here, at no point ever are we working on a rated anchor, which makes things very difficult. We'll get into a little bit about how we can help ourselves a little bit to make good decisions in trees. But right off the bat, the fact is we have no rated anchors, so we have to prepare ourselves for that. Okay? It's also very important with all the equipment that we use. It's very important that it is rated for the specific use that we intend to use it in the industry that we intend to use it. You can see a lot of the guidelines for equipment and general things for tree work under the Z133 standards, which are an ANSI standard. You might want to keep that in mind, just saying. Z133 may come up later on a certain CEU test, possibly, maybe, but you didn't get that from me. So, here we are. We've got all of our fancy gear. There's my tree. All the work I need to do is aloft. So where do we want to start? The idea is we're trying to create a culture of safety here. You've probably heard that term with various TCIA classes, and it's a beautiful term, the culture of safety. Okay? And what that's going to entail is essentially thinking safety at all times in every aspect of everything you do all day, every day. Not just when you're on the job, when you pull up with the truck and you pull out your chainsaws. You should be thinking safety when you're in your car or vehicle driving towards the job site, when you're driving to work, when you're driving home from work, when you're playing with your kids in the yard. It's got to be a mindset that you put yourself in to prepare yourself to always think safety. So here I am, got all the gear obviously, but do I just want to slap this stuff on and away I go once I get out of the truck? Really what we should be doing is inspecting our equipment. Now, how often do I want to inspect my equipment? You'll get a lot of answers on this. If I work out of an aerial lift truck or I climb once every 2 months, do I need to inspect my gear every day? My answer to that would be yes. The answer is any time that you intend to use your equipment working aloft, you need to inspect it before use. We could go into a full, hell, we could spend 3 hours talking about inspecting equipment, and eventually we will. I'd rather not get that in depth to it just yet. I'd imagine all of you have a general idea on what you're looking for in terms of inspecting your equipment. The key is that it meets all the standards for the work that we're going to be doing. Okay? So in this case, I've already pre-inspected my equipment, and on top of that, not only did I inspect it, I went over to good old Nick and I had him inspect me, just to make sure that I didn't miss anything. A lot of times you get very comfortable seeing your own equipment day after day after day after day, and you get used to it and you may not notice a small change, whereas someone who sees your equipment less often has a tendency to pick up on some small things that you might have missed. So I checked my equipment, Nick checked my equipment. Hell, we could spend the next 5 hours checking equipment, but obviously we have work to do, so we need to get moving. So here we are, we're on our job site. We pull up to this tree that has how many known ratings on it? Absolutely none. So the problem is I've got to start making some decisions on how I'm going to access this tree and to keep myself safe while I'm doing it. So for the most part, there are varying ways that I could ascend into this tree and varying ways that I could work this tree, whether it be doubled rope working or moving rope systems, moving into stationary rope systems. You have a lot of options on how to approach this tree. The key is the more options you have, the better off you're going to be. So there's no one right solution to all of these questions. There's no one piece of equipment or technique that I would use on every tree that I climb. So I'm going to base my decisions on what I need to do, the work I need to perform, and various things like that. But primarily, if I'm working on a tree, ideally I'm going to be looking to set my line usually at the highest, most central part of the tree. The reason for that is because I'll need to work angles going out on the limbs. That's not always going to be the case. Depending on the technique that you're using for climbing, you may be able to address certain areas depending on the work you have to do, and you don't have to be tied into the highest central point. But predominantly, rule of thumb, it is going to be the highest, most central part of the tree. So the question there, if I'm sitting here on the ground with my throw ball, and I'm about to use my throw ball to get my line to the highest, most central part of this tree, how well have I inspected that limb that I'm hoping to anchor into? Probably not very well. But when I got to the job site, the first thing I did is I identified my tree, because it tells me an awful lot about what I can expect to see in this particular tree. Depending on the species of wood, it'll tell me if it's more fibrous and stronger, if it grows quicker and is a little bit more brittle. So I'll use that type of information. And in this particular case, I determined that the tree is let's say it's a red oak, quite strong wood, can be brittle on occasion, especially in the deadwood, but for the most part, it's going to be something that I can trust as being solid, sound wood. So let's say I'm aiming for this branch union right here, which, let's say, rule of thumb, what does it tell us? Has to be as thick as your wrist? Well, you can probably tell, we'll do a close-up on my wrist. It's not very thin, or not very thick. I've got a skinny-ass wrist. Because of that, I can assure you, there's no way in hell I'm ever tying on something as thin as my wrist. I don't care what species of tree it is. So that whole rule of thumb is a little bit overblown in my book. Really what I'm looking for is the strongest attachment point that I can access where I know I'm going to be safe. If there's going to be a question with this limb right here, why wouldn't I start right there? Now there's many different ways of advancing your way up the tree. We'll talk about a few of them a little bit later on today, but we're not going to cover the wide spectrum of them. But the fact is, generally, if I can get myself close to the top of the tree, I'll be able to advance my line relatively easy, whether I'm using doubled rope or stationary rope, okay? So usually what I recommend is if that's the one, ultimately the one I want, I'm going to come at least one branch down. Sounds stupid, right? Oh, you're going to waste all that time coming one branch down. Well, the likelihood of that branch one lower being stronger than the one that's above is pretty dang good. So that simple little thing, just coming one branch down, can save me an awful lot of hassle later on and make myself potentially much safer in the tree. Is it a guarantee? Absolutely not. But it's certainly better than going as high as I can possibly get it and just hoping that that branch is going to hold. Okay? This is really strange just talking the whole time. So you got to bear with me on this. Okay. So here's the branch that I'm ideally going to be looking for. Okay. So what we're going to get into right now is I'm going to have my, I'll just climb up first. Don't need you yet, Nick, but later on. So let's say I intend to access this line via a doubled rope system or a moving rope system. It's something I can very easily do. I can anchor in. Okay. Obviously, I'll test my hitch to make sure that it's going to hold me and work with me properly. Okay. And then I can hip thrust my way up the tree, which, as we all know, is not very fun. Hip thrusting is a bit of a pain. You're going to blow up your upper body. You're going to wear yourself out. By the time you do get to the top of the tree, and now you need to start making cuts, when you pull out your chainsaw, you're going to be absolutely exhausted, and there's a good bet you could make a mistake. Okay? Now, if you can get in on the trunk, sometimes you do have the ability to work your way up the trunk as you're climbing, so you can save a bit of energy, sure. But in reality, you're going to look for a easier method to get up the tree. So, what are some of those options? Well, a pretty standard option would be a footlock. Okay, so what I could do is I could set myself, I could use this particular line here, but in this case, I'm going to set a separate access line. And I'm going to do this for two reasons. Number one, I've got the ability to set this line a little bit further away from the trunk, so if I am footlocking up the tree, it gives me room so I can move. I'm no James Kilpatrick. I'm not going to be as smooth as him going up the thing, but I can get reasonably smooth, and it helps to have a straight shot. Okay? Once I get up there, I'm going to transition myself and get into a doubled rope work positioning setup. What is that done by leaving this access line here? Again, think culture of safety. You need to always be thinking for your own personal safety. So if I'm working on this system here, and something were to happen and I would need to be rescued, having a pre-installed access line reasonably close by, it doesn't even have to be close by, as long as it's something that my rescuer can access up and then position themselves, could potentially save a lot of time off of this rescue. Now there's a reason why I'm discussing this. I don't know how many of you are involved with fire departments or have seen fire rescues where they've actually had to rescue a person out of a tree. I do considerable work with fire rescue teams, and they're extremely talented people, a wealth of knowledge. But there are certain things that arborists are better at. I mean, think about it. This is our work environment. This tree is what we're used to climbing on a daily basis. Very few people are going to know more about these types of techniques than actual arborists. So in almost every situation, the easiest way to perform an aerial rescue will be having an arborist perform that rescue. Now there's a catch there. We're all trained, before I even left the ground over here, to have myself a worksite safety plan, a overall safety plan for the overall site, so if something goes wrong, we can immediately enact that plan. Everybody knows what's going on, what they're doing, and all of that. Okay? Well, if I've set all that up, and I now see that we have a casualty in the tree, what's number one on that safety plan? Almost always it's going to be contact first responders, 911 emergency response. Okay, you're going to contact them, and that should be the first thing that's on there because we need to get them activated and mobile to the site. But if they show up on that site before you get into the tree to rescue this victim, you're going to see something very, very, very interesting. You're going to find out that fire rescue crews operate under a completely different set of standards and regulations than arborists do. A fire rescue team would not be able to use one rope to go up into this tree to access my victim and come down. They would have to have two completely independent systems always backed up before they would be able to perform that rescue. And some of you may have seen it. North American Training runs some excellent classes on this type of thing. There's a lot of really good training with this type of interaction between ARB and fire rescue. And I love working with those groups to do it because I always learn as much from them as they learn from me. But on the negative side, the biggest thing that I've learned is I don't want them to do the rescue. I want to do the rescue because it's going to be far faster. Okay? So in the fire regulation standards, if they show up on site and someone is already in the air to try to perform this aerial rescue, they have the authority to potentially let them finish that. However, if I'm on the ground and I'm not in the air yet, at no point ever are they allowed to bring in outside help in order to effect this rescue. So if they showed up before I was off the ground, they would not let me get in the air, period. And the reason for that is they then become liable for me and anything that I do in that rescue, okay? And they don't want that liability, I can assure you. So that's why you see fire crews typically bringing in big trucks, doing all sorts of weird, interesting, really fun stuff, by the way. You should definitely look into it. It's fun stuff to train on. But it's in terms of efficiency and speed, it's not going to be like what we're used to seeing, okay? Probably quite a few of you are competition climbers, and you're used to having 5 minutes to perform an aerial rescue, luckily with a preset access line. Okay, that's not what you're going to see if a fire crew shows up to do this rescue. So all that being said, it goes back to me thinking about safety again, the culture of safety. If I know I have to access this tree over here, and potentially I'm on a double rope system or a stationary rope system, it doesn't matter. Okay? What I will do is as I'm setting up my system, I will make sure that I've got an avenue for access for rescue. Okay? You'll see later where I could actually use this as another avenue for working in the tree using two systems, but I'm purposely setting myself an avenue for rescue before I start my work in the tree. Okay? Sounds a little weird. Takes a little bit getting used to. Does it take a little time? Sure. Does it involve a little bit of equipment? Absolutely. But the fact is, right off the bat, you're going to be safer in that tree because you've got access for safety. Okay, now we're going to pause here for a minute for a little giveaway, and these guys will take over, and then we'll get back into the fun.
We've got a rope wrench giveaway. Hitch.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah, we've got a rope wrench to give away, and the first question, the prize is going to go to the person who posts it as a comment on the live stream first, okay? Not the second person, the first person.
Okay, so...
And they need to correctly post, and the question's going to be on the screen here in just a second, the city and postal code of the global ISC headquarters.
City and postal code of ISC Wales. Okay, you're really lucky you don't have to do any of the other Welsh words that go around where we're based out of, or pronounce them. Okay. Okay, do I need to leave some time for them to play with that, or should we keep going?
No, you can keep going, and we'll announce all the winners in the next.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah, you can keep going, Rich, and we'll announce all the winners in the next day or two.
Okay, excellent. Okay, so just to recap a little bit, we haven't gone into too much yet, but just to, in case you just joined us, we're going to be talking about some equipment, obviously, but really talking about the culture of safety, and we'll be getting into various aerial rescue techniques, as well talking about different types of gear we can use in all these scenarios, and really highlighting the unique nature of the arborist industry. We are the single and only industry that does not use rated anchors while we're climbing, and I'm here to tell you that that gets us some odd looks from all the other industries out there. But as we all know, it's the freest type of climbing that there is in terms of just flying around the tree, usually on a one rope system, and it's fantastic. We all love it. But we also know it can be extremely dangerous. So it's all about focusing on making ourselves safe on those jobs. Okay? So we talked about, as I'm setting up my systems for working this tree, I'm going to identify the tree. It tells me an awful lot about it. We're going to do a pre-climb inspection, obviously looking for electrical hazards and all that, looking for sounding out the base of the tree, making sure that we don't have any hollow or damaged sections, looking for insects. I'm personally not very partial to bees, and I can't stand finding them as I'm climbing. I'd imagine a few of you are like that as well. We're also going to be identifying hazards, potential hazards, depending on the work that we're going to be doing. We've all been in that situation where we've completely taped off our work area, and then the homeowner's dog comes running through, and she comes chasing after it just as a big limb comes down. These are all the fun things that we get to deal with. Okay, so we've identified the tree. We've sort of figured out where we kind of would like to be in the tree. As we all know, that completely changes the second we leave the ground. One of the things we talked about is that, sure, the highest, most central branch union is ultimately where I might want to be, but I can't inspect that when I'm throwing at it from the ground. If it's 80 feet up, I cannot fully inspect that limb. So why not come one limb down? How hard is it to advance up that last limb? Typically not very hard at all. So especially for you climbers that are using stationary systems, I would highly recommend always starting just a little bit lower, because why not? It's not very difficult. Okay, so why don't we start having some fun here, and we'll get good old Nick harnessed up, and we're going to put him on a doubled rope system, and we'll have him ascend up into this tree, and, well, it's this aluminum tree here. It doesn't have to go very high, luckily. And we'll talk about some aspects of potential rescue in this situation.
Before I come on, Rich, and get all suited up, because it's going to take me quite a long time to get a harness on, because it's been a while for me. We're going to take some questions from the Facebook community.
Okay.
So if you want questions, hit the thumbs up sign for me real quick, because I love seeing those thumbs up go across the screen. And if you have a question, type it in, and Kale's going to feed those over.
Sounds good.
And you can answer them, and we'll put them up on the screen, and we'll answer some of those, and I'll get suited up, and we'll start that in a couple minutes, okay?
Alrighty, sounds
awesome.
good.
Kale, you got some questions ready for us, yeah? Sophie's got a question.
Sophie clearly has a question. Over 290 pounds, do I recommend a stationary rope system? What I'm going to say there is stationary rope systems are not just an option, but a range of options. They allow you to do a lot of things completely differently than you would have done them with a doubled rope system. In terms of the weight, really, it's going to be no different for you than working on a doubled rope system, with a caveat. If you're working off of a Basal Anchor setup, and we'll be talking about that shortly, there certainly is the potential to increase loads in the tree using a Basal Anchor system. So a heavier climber still has access to those systems, absolutely, but you would definitely want to make very good decisions upon where you're routing your rope through that tree. Because again, they're all on unrated anchors. You do have the ability to put more limbs into the situation there, but that doesn't mean you're evenly spreading that load throughout the tree. So just exactly like a double rope climbing system, it'll depend on the decisions you make in terms of setup. But in terms of functionality of your system, a 290-pound climber should have no issues with the stationary rope setup versus a doubled rope. Excellent question. Uh-oh, another question. The question is, why won't this guy just shut up? Okay. Question almost here?
Our next question is from Jason Dudek. Preferred way to leave or attach a rescue line in the tree. And I'm live so they can hear me.
Perfect. The question is the preferred method of leaving a rescue line in the tree. Well, again, you're going to have a lot of options on this because when we start talking about Basal Anchor with stationary rope setups, I easily have the ability to add multiple lines into that setup. Now, I know what you're going to say right off the bat. Now I'm dramatically increasing the load, and the answer is potentially yes, but I also can lock off any one of those extra ropes in there. So you can create static redirects on 2 of those legs when I'm setting 3 of them up. Now, we'll get into that in a little bit, I promise. The most common method of doing it would be to just run a canopy anchor up. A lot of us have been doing this with foot locking for quite some time so that we can get the rope right up against the trunk, up against the branch, and we don't get the rope spread like we would if the rope was just going over the limb. So a fairly common method of leaving a line would be just setting a canopy anchor, a choked anchor, that allows me enough rope so I can pull the whole system down to retrieve it. Because with any luck, I'm not going to be ever using this as a rescue line, a rescue access line. With luck, it's just going to be sitting here. Which brings up another point. Does having this rope here cause us a potentially bigger problem? Because what if this gets wrapped up in a limb and ends up going through a chipper? Obviously, all these things can occur. It's just going to depend on how you set it up, how you manage it, and again, that culture of safety, always thinking safety. And when that involves everybody on your team, so we should all be paying attention to this. So preferred method, really, I hate to answer that question because there are just too many different answers. What works best for you might not work best for me. But a retrievable canopy anchor is a nice, easy way of doing it. Could I use a basal anchor as my access line? Sure, as long as the whole team is trained on exactly what's going on there. So you have a lot of options. I hope I didn't dance around that question too terribly much.
Our next question is also about your preference. From James Fairfield, what do you prefer, attaching the victim to your system or keeping them on theirs? Obviously, there's probably a lot of factors associated with that, if their line's compromised, but just in general, what do you think is probably going to be your go-to, I think, is what James
I can count on James for jumping ahead here. Hey, James, how we doing, sir? James has a technical background in rope access, as well as a fire background. So he's seen a bit more in various types of rescue scenarios than your standard arborist has. And James, we will be talking about all of that. Where we're going to eventually end up today is we will be doing a rescue on a stationary line where I do a pick-off rescue staying beneath him. And in that case, we will be using a 2-person load-rated device, and in that case, I will be connecting the victim to me and picking him off. So an excellent question. You're leading this right the direction that we will be going. So if you can just bear with me a little bit, James, we'll get to that at some point. And I hope your shoulders aren't burning too bad from working out today. Any other questions? We're good? One more. Okay.
What is your recommended knot for your rope attachment when climbing SRT?
What is my recommended knot for my rope attachment? I'm assuming they're talking canopy anchor in that case. You've got options. Again, when it comes to personal preference, there's going to be 10 million different options on how to do it. For anyone who has sat through any of my other classes, my longer classes, you'll know that I love options. I love having as many options as humanly possible. So really, you've got a million things to pull from. Now, the standard, if we're running just a canopy anchor, you'll notice this one. I'm just using an alpine butterfly, and I've fed the rope through it. So you're probably rightly suggesting that, well, A, there's going to be some drag. You're going to have some textile on textile interaction there. And if I go through, well, when we get in a stationary rope, if I go through redirects, that type of thing, this could potentially be a little more difficult to pull out. So that's an absolute good thought for sure. What I would say in this case is this one is being left strictly for rescue and hopefully not being used at all. So I'm not going to get a whole lot of that textile interaction because it's hopefully just staying here. Now, that being said, you could very easily incorporate a ring into the system in order to avoid a lot of that textile-to-textile interaction. If I were climbing on a canopy anchor, and again, who cares what I would do personally, but typically, if I'm climbing on a canopy anchor, I would set it with a ring to manage some of that friction and to reduce the textile-to-textile interaction. I hope that answered your question. I hope that's the direction you were looking to go on that. But if not, hopefully we'll cover it a little bit coming up soon. Okay, so in this scenario, we're going to have Nick, who decided to, you're going to the double rope, sir.
Okay, you're going on the double rope.
Yep.
I remember how to use this.
That's exactly why I put him over there. Okay, now, before Nick starts climbing, let's talk about a few things in the system. What is the actual life support in this system, the life support element?
Are you asking me?
I am Nick.
The Prusik is.
The Prusik hitch. The hitch will be the life support.
The ring and the bridge, but in terms of my adjuster on the line or what's going to hold me up on the rope, it's this Prusik right here.
And what weight rating can that hitch hold?
The hitch, is probably going to slide at 700-800 pounds, I would guess, but the Prusik is rated to at least 5,400 pounds in basket.
Excellent. And what's the max load rating on that hitch?
The max load rating on the hitch in basket is going to be 5,400 pounds minimum braking strength. If you wanted to calculate a safe working load.
But what I'm getting at, really all of these numbers are almost next to meaningless. Because as Nick said, this hitch, it's a hitch. It will slip at a certain point, and that's a good thing actually, because it'll help dissipate force in the event of a fall. But the thing is, my hitch is going to be different than Nick's hitch. Nick's hitch is going to be different than mine. It's going to be different than Kale's. So what this actual particular hitch with this particular hitch diameter and cord and type matched to this host line cord and type is going to be completely different. It is never going to be a static number.
It was a trick question.
There
was no rating. I was like going to get real mad and go there because I believe all that personally, but is he baiting me?
I didn't mean to set him up, but it's just a discussion here. So in reality, we have no idea what that hitch can hold. Now certainly we test it for body weight. Before we climb, hopefully we all test it for body weight before we climb. And of course, this is not the only configuration. There's any number of different pieces of equipment you can put into this, and it can be equally or more smooth. But really what I'm getting at is we can test this hitch. We know it's going to hold me. Okay, it's going to hold my personal body weight. Hopefully in the event of a fall, everything's going to be covered. Now, could this hold two people, do you think?
I do think so.
You do think so?
I do.
But you don't know.
I know it'll hold two people.
You know it'll hold two people.
I do know that, yeah. I mean, I know it as much as someone knows it won't.
Okay.
Right?
Will operating that hitch be smooth with two people on it? Not at all.
No.
Okay.
It won't modulate well, but I feel reasonably confident that it'll hold both of our weight.
Okay. So what I'm getting at here is we've got a doubled rope setup, moving rope setup, whatever you want to call it. We've got a hitch as our main life support. We're anchored into the backside, so now our climber can ascend up this tree. Don't have to go super far.
Do the old hip thrust action here. 1, 2, and some slack. This is very efficient.
Okay, that's good.
All right.
So, I'm working on this job with Nick. Incidentally, how many people should be on this job site as Nick is climbing? Do you think Nick wants to be, what's that?
At least 2.
At least 2.
That's the very minimum.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with you. Have we all worked in situations where there's been one before? If we're being honest?
Regrettably.
If we're being honest, absolutely we've done that. And again, go back to that culture of safety. How safe is it for me to be on this job site by myself with nobody around to at least inactivate an emergency response plan?
You know, Rich, that's one of the reasons that we've designed all of our competitions since the second one, or since the third one, in that way, bringing teamwork into the element. And even in Jambo 1 and 2, we allowed a groundsperson to help the competitor because we always believed that we should showcase people working together and not in a singular fashion.
That's a fantastic thing,
Yeah.
absolutely.
So.
And one of the things I love when all that goes down, and we've all been there, we've all been part of an excellent crew that has been working together for a while, and nobody even needs to say anything because it just runs like clockwork.
Yep.
It's a beautiful thing. But it doesn't always run like clockwork. And in that case, communication is going to be absolutely vital. I've got a little whistle here to help communicate. If I'm up in a tree about to send a limb down, I'm going to clear the area, of course. Of course, nowadays, I'm an old guy, okay? Nowadays, it's all changed. The comm systems,
and Bluetooth, yeah.
the comm systems are absolutely phenomenal. So to really help, because if I come onto the job site, I see Nick hanging here, and he's just hanging here. If I can get right into his ear and start talking to him, that would be a beautiful thing. Unfortunately, I don't have a comm set up, so I'm going to start yelling. Okay? We're not going to go into all that. We've all done it. We've all practiced it. But I'm going to get Nick's attention. I'm going to try to figure out what's going on. I've determined that he's unresponsive and something needs to happen. So I'm going to activate my emergency response plan, which we have set right in our truck. It's got all the details of where we're at, the work that we're performing, how long we intended to be on the job, where the closest hospital is, all that stuff. If you don't have one of those in your truck, I highly suggest developing one within your team. Because it's absolutely vital for the first responders actually to be able to get to you and know what's going on with all that information. So, okay, so I've determined that Nick's unresponsive here, and I've determined that I need to go get him, because a couple of weeks ago I watched the fire crew rescue, and I'm not picking on fire guys. I'll be up in Indianapolis doing the fire rescue show here shortly, so don't get me in trouble. I work with the fire rescue team. I love those guys and girls, but the fact is I can get at this tree a hell of a lot faster than they can. So that's what I'm going to do. I've determined that he needs to be brought down. So this brings up a couple of interesting questions. Okay? Well, it'll become more when we get into stationary rope systems, because with a doubled rope system, for me to get Nick down, what's my only option here? Pretty much I have to go up in order to get him to bring him down.
Unless you got a pole pruner.
Unless I've got a pole pruner. Because this tail end of the rope doesn't do anything for me, I can't just automatically lower him down, unless, let's say, he was on a floating false crotch, on a pulley that we had set up specifically for that application. Potentially I could have lowered him down. But in this case, he's up on a friction saver, and he's unconscious. He needs to be rescued. So luckily, when Nick went up, he set me an access line. Because what would happen if I started climbing up the tail of his rope here? Well, he's on a moving rope system.
I'd go up.
It would start moving him up. Eventually, he's going to jam himself into a limb, and by the time I do get to him, he's going to be really pissed off at me. So we're going to avoid that option. But Nick was smart enough, he left me an access line here. So I could hook on, I could do a foot lock up and transfer over to a doubled rope system or a stationary rope system. I could, because this is set up with one static leg, I could just ascend up on this one static leg with a rope walking system. You have 10 billion options. The option I'm going to use here will involve a rope wrench. Now, what's the life support on this rope wrench system? Well, guess what? It's that hitch. So what I'm going to do before I do anything is I'm going to test the hitch without the rope wrench at all to make sure that it grabs. And what I'm looking for specifically is I'm not looking for a hitch that grabs initially, then sputters for a bit, slides down, and then grabs again. I'm looking for something that's going to grab me positively and immediately the first time I try it. And I'm also going to try it multiple times after that. The reason being is that is my life support. Well, we all know that if you're climbing on a stationary line with a hitch, and I don't have a device to break the friction on that, working that hitch is very, very difficult. So because I know I'm using a rope wrench system here, I need to plan for the fact that what if this blows up? Well, I'm here to tell you, the likelihood of this blowing up is zero. Absolutely zero. But let's just say by some complete and utter weird miracle, something happened and either came disconnected from the line or no longer worked. I would need to have a method of creating friction to come down with my hitch. I could do that simply with a carabiner, but invariably I'm going to bring a figure 8 with me just because I like to remind myself that my boss is always looking over my shoulder. Just kidding. A figure 8 is a wonderfully useful device in order to create friction for this exact type of scenario. But, of course, nothing's going to happen here, and we know this. So, I tested my hitch. I can hook on my little advancement tool, and I can work my way up the tree. Now, the whole time I'm doing that, I'm trying to maintain some sort of contact with Nick, talking to him, making sure he's still doing well. All right, and I get up to him. And, of course, I forgot some equipment. I always do. Good Lord. Luckily, we have a cameraman there. don't suppose you want to grab me that little sling on the backside.
Taylor didn't forget any equipment, but he also wasn't smart enough to deem me as unresponsive. So he had a different type of person to rescue.
Ooh, nice.
can
Nope,
tell you
the
watch.
little orange one. There you go, that one. And as they say, these are the joys of live TV, eh?
I think it's pretty awesome that we're able to bring you here and present this to the arborist world. I mean, it may be a small viewership, but it's super important to me. And I mean, you joke about the live TV. I think it's so cool that we're able to broadcast this type of training material. I mean, this really hasn't been done before, you know, and nobody's really trying to do it better and keep trying new things. And I think it's super awesome.
Oh, I
It might
agree.
be a bumpy road for us. I mean, we've certainly had our difficulties in these broadcasts, but they get better and better every time, and I'm really excited for this year. I mean, we're probably going to do 10 of these this year, if
Oh,
not
sweet.
more. Yeah.
And I love being part of it. So if I haven't bored too many people to tears and you want me back, I'm always happy to do it.
It's only if he gets enough thumbs up and heart symbols. So if you want Rich for another webinar, keep jamming on that thumbs up button.
Okay, so the key is, wait, Cale, did you have something there?
He
Okay.
just makes random.
Just random noise.
Yeah, just random noises.
Okay, so I've ascended to the point that I can now get to my victim and I can make my initial assessment. Obviously, I'm going to be looking to clear the breathing passageway, all of that. Let's say he's got a major wound that I can put a tourniquet on, all that type of stuff. This is not a first aid rescue class. I'd highly recommend you talk to some of the guys at NAC for that. They are freaking champs at it.
Absolutely.
Really, really good stuff. What I'm going to do here is, because I'm on a descent system here that can handle my weight, and Nick's on a descent system there, the pretty standard method for aerial rescue that we've learned up to this point would be simply to make a connection from me over to my victim
This is why I do this.
so that I can get some sort of control of the scenario. The key is, as I'm lowering Nick's system, if he starts swinging wildly and away from me, it's going to be very difficult for me to control it. So I want to get him into a spot where I can at least have some means of control here. But this is sort of a gray area, because in order to descend, I'm going to have to use one hand on Nick's hitch. I'm going to have to use one hand on my hitch. Typically, when we use these systems, we have one hand on the hitch, one hand on the brake. Well, in this case, I've got two hands on two hitches. I've got no hands on no brake for the ropes. So in reality, how much control do I actually have here?
You know, you have some until something goes wrong.
Until something goes wrong.
And then the amount is questionable.
Yep. That's what I'm trying to get at
We
here.
don't want something to go wrong, right? Because something has already gone wrong. So, like, it's likely that it could go wrong again.
Which brings up a very interesting point. What is the number one rule of rescue?
Do not become another victim.
There you go. Okay.
Absolutely.
So we're trying to control the scenario to make sure that we don't become a victim ourselves. So right now I'm on a hitch that is rated, well, who knows what it's rated at, but we know it can hold one person, okay? Well, what if when I get to Nick and I've made my connection to Nick, suddenly his branch attachment fails and he's connected to me? What now happens?
We could simulate that.
We could simulate that. We're not going to, though. But his entire weight would now come onto me. Now, hopefully, it wouldn't be much of a fall factor there because I'm connected to him. It'll be controlled. But if he took a noticeable swing or produced a fall factor and put that onto me, well, we don't know what this hitch is rated at already. Not only that, we don't know what this limb is rated at. So now I've got two-person load on one hitch on a limb that we don't know what it's rated at. And in reality, how safe is that scenario? Well, this is why fire crews end up putting 500 guys up there, setting up 10 million ropes, and, well, usually it's only 2 ropes, but they set a very controlled scenario, trying to minimize the number of things that can potentially go wrong, and trying to maximize the knowledge that they know. In this case, what I do know is that I've checked his system now, beneath it. We've determined he's got enough rope to come down, connected to him, so we know that I can control this. And I can work with this reasonably well, and I can bring Nick down, and it works out pretty well. For any competition climber, we've done this 700,000 times. But in reality, how much real control did I have in that situation?
Depending on the situation, you had enough, and maybe you didn't. For a low rescue where you need to get someone down in a hurry, and you deem that the risks of having them up there longer, that might be the play. But
Yep, and
if there's a better way to do it, I'm sure we're going to find that out here shortly.
And I love that answer. I had just enough control until I didn't have any control. Pretty much, because we tried to minimize the things that can go wrong. We tried to get as much control of the situation as possible. But the fact is, I was still riding 2 unknown hitches on 2 unknown anchors.
Yep.
Okay? Just something to throw out there. So let's send you back up.
I'm going back up.
Give away something. Let's do one more little rescue here, and then we'll give away some stuff.
Oh no, let's give away something right now, Kale. Do the people want giveaways? I think they want to give away. Can you see the hearts on your screen, Carson? No, did we get any hearts when we said giveaway? I think people want to give away. We've got what do we have?
Oh,
We've got a full rope wrench. We've got a rope wrench, an ISC pulley, and a fixed tether.
well, I'll take that. What's the question?
What's the question, Cal? Ooh, where is Rich Hattier from?
I even know the answer to
We
that
were
one.
going to tell you this at the beginning, but we didn't. So it's even harder. Yeah, where is Rich Hattier from? First person to get that one right wins a complete rope wrench setup.
Sweet.
We'll even throw in a hitch, Yale Veritas.
Ooh,
Pretty cool, upcycled hitch cord.
I take it I'm disqualified from this competition.
You are disqualified,
Damn it.
and you can't tell them now. We'll see. Kale might even throw up some of the more ridiculous answers on the screen. So if you've got a funny answer instead of a serious one, feel free to contribute that as well.
All right. In that case, Drew Bristow, you're also disqualified. Don't even put anything up there.
You think he's disqualified as well? Yeah. Sorry, Drew.
Okay. Oh,
I'm going back up.
there we go. Nick's going back up. Okay, perfect. So here we are. We're back in that rescue scenario. I realize that Nick is unconscious. I've activated my emergency response plan. We're back to the anchor that he preset me, just specifically for this. Now, the funny thing about that, before Nick went up, him and I got together as a crew, and we're like, hey, man, if we're going to preset a line for rescue, let's make sure that we're setting it on a limb that could potentially handle 2-person load, if not more. So he didn't necessarily set this line right up at the tippity top of the tree. He set it up on something that is significantly more solid. So in the event that we have to put 2 people on this line, he's already planned ahead for it. Culture of safety. He's planning ahead for his own safety. Okay? So we've done everything, called everybody I'm supposed to call. Before I went up, which I didn't do last time. Ooh, this will be a question for somebody. Before I ascend up this tree, what I want to do is make sure everybody on this site knows that I'm ascending up this tree to go get this victim. And there's 2 reasons for that. Number 1, when the fire crew shows up and they're saying, hey, what's going on? The other person on the crew can say, hey, this guy's already ascended into the tree and he's going after the victim. So at that point, the fire crew knows that potentially there's a more qualified climber for this work environment up there that can help assist on this rescue. Okay? So he knows I'm already aloft, okay, because he's not going to let anybody else go aloft, I can guarantee that, okay? The other thing it does is it lets everybody on the ground know that we're now getting a second person up into the air. Again, the first rule of rescue is we don't want to make it a 2-person rescue, okay? So now everybody on the ground is aware that yet another person is going aloft. So I've told everybody that. I've set up my rope wrench. For those of you who have sat through any of my other classes and have heard me say that I will gladly buy you a bourbon if I don't test my hitch prior to advancing, guess what? You're still not getting a bourbon out of me. Now, I'm happy to have you come down and join me for a bourbon, but I will not buy it because I haven't tested my hitch. Okay? So now I can ascend up to my victim, talking to him the whole way.
Did Mike Games make you that hook?
I've checked to make sure he doesn't have enough, or make sure he has enough rope to get down. His line doesn't look compromised beneath him. I'm going to ascend up. Now, when I get it this time, I'm going to do something a little bit different. As we said, we're trying to control as many variables as possible. In this scenario, I've got 2 hitches that are of who knows what actual strength rating, what they can actually hold. I've got 2 branches of who knows what they can actually hold. We've certainly planned ahead for this one to hold more weight in case I need to put 2 persons on it. This one, again, I don't actually know. Of course, Nick and I as a team, as we discussed this tree, we made sure that he was going to tie into something that was suitable. Okay? So what I'm going to do here, because this is still an unknown, and this technically can only handle one person, what I'm going to do is change that scenario. The way I'm going to change it is I'm going to add a mechanical device that can handle two-person load, a two-person load-rated device. Now you're probably asking yourself, oh, here we go. This guy's company makes gear. He's all about selling gear. Now I got to lug up this whole extra piece. What are the chances I've actually got this extra piece? Well, hopefully we're about to give you a reason to consider having this. All right? This could be sitting in my rescue kit. You all have rescue kits on the trucks, correct? Just for this exact scenario? Excellent.
So a simulated point of view nod.
That was a pretty good simulation. So potentially this device could be sitting in my rescue kit for this exact application ready to go. Okay? What this device is the ISC D4. Does it have to be the ISC D4? No. I might have just gotten fired, but whatever. This particular device happens to work perfect for this application. It's an EN 12841 Type C mechanical device. What that essentially tells you is that it's a primary function would be as a descender or work positioning, okay? Placement. I can also use it for belay, I can use it for progress capture, I can use it for 1,010,000 other things, but its primary function is as a descender, okay? Now this device, it's rated to EN 12841, it's also rated to ANSI 359.4, and it is a two-person load-rated device. The max weight load on this is 240 kgs, which roughly equates to, what, 540? 500 is a rule of thumb, but it's actually a little bit more than that.
Easy, yeah.
Yep. So I know that I can put two people on this, and that's going to be very important very quickly, because we're going to do exactly that. So I can install this device beneath my rope wrench. I can cinch it right up to my rope wrench, put my foot ascender on, and we can talk about foot ascenders later if you like. I'm going to stand up a little bit, which will allow me to disconnect, hopefully, my rope wrench. And then I can sit back on my two-person load-rated device. And I've got this in the lock position. Okay? Now, one particular unique thing about this device, like I said, you have other options to use for this. But this particular one, in our user instruction manual, which everybody reads all the time and keeps on hand and keeps a record of their equipment, absolutely, something we'll talk about later. This particular device is rated for two people where I don't need to create additional friction to run it with two people. I can take two-person load right off the nose. I can take it off the side here, no worries. I don't have to incorporate any additional friction. Other devices are not like that, okay? So important to know your equipment. So now that I've transferred to a two-person load-rated device, I'm going to do something really kind of unique for arborists, but something that's very common for every other height discipline. I'm going to connect my rescue strap to the spine side of my attachment carabiner. Don't freak out on me yet. You'll see why we're going to do that in a minute. Okay? So now I can get over to my victim. I can connect onto his harness. All right? And now, because he's on a system that can descend, I'm just going to descend him onto me. Okay, everything's aligning nicely. All right, so there we go. Nick is now on my system. He's hanging off of that strap, which is hanging off of my two-person load-rated device. Okie dokie. And let's get that out of the way.
Jesus Christ, Rich.
I could have
Hi,
made
Rich.
this.
How are you?
Yeah, I'm getting a little friendly up here. Sweet. All right. Let's toss that guy. Okay. So you can probably see what's going on here. So, in this case, to work this device, I'll need two hands. One hand on the brake, one hand on the actual device to lower down. But how much control do I actually have here? Well, in this case, I'm not working two separate hitches. In this case, I can actually have one hand on the lever as I'm supposed to, and one hand on the brake end of it. So my control of this two-person load is significantly better than what I had a minute ago with the two independent hitches. Okay, wait, stay elevated. So,
Oh, this is an ab workout.
now,
I feel like I'm doing beach body.
the reason why I hooked myself onto the spine side of my carabiner on the D4 is once I get low to the ground, I can leave my victim suspended and I can walk myself out of the system. Now, where that'll come into play is if you get into suspension trauma, which we're not going to talk an awful lot about here, but it is a situation that you have to address. Sorry, I was going to pull you up. And you see, by attaching to the spine side of my carabiner on the D4, it allows me to walk out of the system and leave my victim suspended, which is really, really nice. And there's no chance of rotating over onto the gates. Okay, look a little bit weird.
It was pretty slick. You know, we saw a really interesting rescue from Taylor in the last webinar we did. But it wasn't anything like that. And that was really cool.
Excellent.
Very slick.
So the key there, again, culture of safety. What I'm trying to do is make myself as safe as possible. So by incorporating a two-person load-rated device into the rescue scenario, it allows me more control over of the victim the whole way. So in my view, that makes it a safer rescue.
Sure, absolutely. No,
Okay.
right tool for the job, as they say, absolutely.
Yep. Sweet. Any questions on that?
Very cool. Well, I think we'll probably take some questions
Okay.
from the web.
And then we can set up for the next stuff.
I'll take a moment for a shameless plug here. You know, obviously the topic of rescue is very important. I'm really proud for Tree Stuff to have been involved in the formation of the Fallen Families Fund. It's a charity that we started, Rich, that is
Heard about it. It's excellent.
directly benefiting families or individuals that are affected by either injury or fatality. So, you know, you get hurt or disabled, we're there the Fallen Families Fund is there to provide a cash grant to you. If God forbid you were to die or one of your family members were to die in, you know, the line of service in the arborist industry, there are grants available to help you get through that time. Certainly not, you know, a lifetime stipend or anything like that, and you know, it may not be enough ever, but it's something that we're really, really proud to do, and we absorb all of the administrative fees for that, so any money that people donate or anything like that, 100% of it directly goes to families. There's no costs or anything like that that are covered by donations. So if you want to learn more about that, you can make a donation on the front of treestuff.com. There's a little product you can add. It's $1, and you can, like a gift card, you can scale it up or down as much as you want. Or you can go to fallenfamiliesfund.org, O-R-G, which is a site that's a work in progress. But we have filed all the paperwork. We've started fundraising. You know, we're official 501(c)(3) charity, the whole 9 yards. So please check that out, fallenfamiliesfund.org. And the next time you buy something, you know, throw a couple bucks or something that way, and hope that you never need to receive that money. So.
Yep, very nice.
Rich, I'm going to give you the floor back. I'm going to go back to the command station. We'll get a couple of questions about what we just saw, and then we'll let you segue to your next topic.
So what we've done so far, we've talked about a little bit about the just the idea of culture of safety. We work in a very, very dangerous environment, a very unique environment where we have no rated anchors really at any point, unless you're working off a crane. So we have to adapt ourselves to that situation and make ourselves as safe as possible. We have many ways of accessing trees, whether it be a double rope setup, a stationary rope setup, foot locking, blah, blah, blah. We talked a little bit about the idea of setting myself an access line. Just in case I need to be rescued, I have a line already preset for someone to come up and get me. Pretty clearly, the best way to do it would be to never have the accident to begin with. So the idea of maybe starting a little bit lower in the tree, where you have a better chance of having a stronger limb versus automatically shooting for that 120-foot branch union. Now, of course, I'm only saying that because I can't hit 120 feet. Just kidding. I can. Sometimes. Not the one I'm looking for, though. All right. Anyway, we have questions? Okay.
Yeah, so our first question, you know, you were very diplomatic. You talked about the other devices.
Sure.
Someone on here has pointed out that you need extra friction with the Petzl rig or ID.
Correct.
Those are both very similar to the D4. Are you able to open up the D4 and maybe show us some of the differences that make it so that it doesn't require that additional friction? Can you talk to us a little bit about why it's a two-person load-rated device and how that functions?
That's an excellent question, and whoever asks that, send in an application, please. I need you on the payroll. Just kidding. The comment was not every device allows you to have two-person load without adding additional friction, but this particular device, you don't need to add any additional friction. And the reason for it is really right here. So your typical descender will have a cam that looks something a bit like that. It'll be a smaller area for the rope to grab onto. You'll notice the ISC cam is much larger and it's offset. And because of that, as I work the handle, it will put more and more of this into play depending on the amount of weight I have on it. So with many other devices, the sweet spot where you can descend smoothly can be very tight. Not always, and you can get around that. There are methods of getting around that. But with the ISC D4, because of this progressive cam, you have a much wider sweet spot, so your actual control for one person is unbelievable, and for two person is absolutely gorgeous. So the main reason behind that is this progressive cam that we've got, and this is a full stainless cam. And again, this is ISC, so everything on this is metal except for one single piece right here, which is Delrin, and that is simply to dissipate heat. Any of the working surfaces on this device, they will be metal. We build strictly for industrial. Excellent question. And I can recommend other devices that will also work, but obviously this is my favorite. Yes, sir.
Our next question is from AJ, and AJ asked, why not ascend with the D4?
Why not ascend with the D4? Excellent question, AJ. The fact is you can, and I was going to get to that, but we can talk about that now. I could have taken, I had to do a transfer in that scenario. Now, it was a safe transfer because I had the device I was transferring onto already engaged before I disconnected my primary. But the fact is, I could have taken another step out of that by just ascending on my descending device. Excellent point, AJ. Now, what I would suggest to you is that I'll make that decision based on the height that I need to go. So if I'm in a scenario where my victim is relatively low to the ground, and that number will vary, if I can access them relatively easily and quickly, I may start on this system here. And one way to do it, you have a lot of different options on doing it. One option would be to use a hand descender and to essentially set up a RADS redirect. Could use a pulley there. I can incorporate a bunch of gear. I don't have to. I can make it pretty simple. So virtually all of these descenders will allow you to ascend as well. So by setting up a RADS redirect, it allows me to pull myself up, and I can very easily do that. I could use my foot ascender here to make it even easier, so that now I can really start getting, it's smooth, I'll give you that. It is smooth, but because you're in well, technically a 3-to-1 here would be my guess, it's not very efficient. So if I had to go 60 feet, I find I'm much faster on a rope wrench if I need to get up 60 feet. So I'll ascend up to my victim and then transfer to the D4. If they're lower down, absolutely. I could start out on the D4, get right to them so I don't have to do that transfer. It's an excellent question. Okay. So let me come down. Oh, actually, let me go back up because I need to rescue my rope wrench because we will need it eventually. So talk amongst yourselves while I'm getting all this stuff. Somebody's plotting some trick questions, I know it. Okay, so what we're going to get into now. In this setup, we had a climber that was in a moving rope or doubled rope setup. And we mentioned that really the only way he could be rescued was for someone to get into the air and actually get to the victim to rescue him. So the question becomes, is there a way to set this up to where I don't need someone to get into the air? And I'm sure quite a few of you are saying right now, well, of course there is. And one way to do that would be to move into a stationary rope setup, or SRS system, and you're going to access that with a Basal Anchor. Now, for any of you who have played with stationary rope systems, you know that there are multiple ways of setting it up, and there's going to be a range of positives and negatives to each style of setup. So you have the stationary rope and you've got the canopy anchor. For those of you who have suffered through my much longer 9-hour, really in-depth options more than you ever want to hear class, which I'm happy to do again at any point, you'll know that there's 1,010,000 different ways of setting this up, and you'll have a huge range of options with it, okay? So we're going to start with a basal anchor simply because for those getting into stationary rope systems, this is often the first way you're going to access it. The reason being that it's just so easy to do. Now, typically as we're taking our throw ball and we're trying to set it up into this tree at the best branch union, you've always got that issue of having to isolate that branch. Now I find 9 times out of 10, I can hit it my first throw, no problem, until the homeowner's standing right behind me, and then I can't hit a damn thing except for her dog, typically. But in reality, anytime you have to isolate a limb, it potentially can take more time. So one of the first benefits of a basal anchor setup is not only do I not have to isolate the limb, I don't want to isolate the limb. Okay? So in this case, I've got my throw ball, one throw, got it through multiple limbs, and got it set up so I can very easily anchor a rope. Okay, and then I can throw that up through the tree. This is a strange little tree. It's got some sharp angles. Some really strong wood, though, I have to say. Okay. So the beauty of a basal anchor is it's that easy to set up, really. There's just one piece missing, and I'm sure all of you know what it is. I need to anchor down the rope in order for me to climb. So, of course, I pulled this through the wrong end. Let's get to the other end. That could be good there. So what are my options on anchoring this down? Again, you've got 50 billion options, and I'm more than happy to tell you every one of those options and invent a few more in the process in a much longer class. But we don't have that kind of time today. So one way is I could just girth it, or running bowline to the base of the trunk, right? Could anchor that down. All right, let's set that up just to see what that looks like. This is why I didn't pull all the rope through before. Okay. So I could just take a running bowline. I could just anchor it around the base of the trunk. You usually sing to yourself while you're doing it. Okay. That anchors it down, hopefully, so I can start working on this. Now, if you set up your basal anchor setup thinking that I could be rescued from the ground, and that's why this is such a great setup, guess what? You just messed up. Because in this case, the rope is fixed at the base. So in this setup, I cannot be lowered down to the ground. It doesn't help me at all. Okay? Helps me in the fact that it's a fast setup. Okay? So I can just start working on this right now. Hopefully I'm over numerous strong limbs, because one of the key characteristics of a basal anchor is if I have 100% of my weight on this side, that requires 100% of my weight on the back side to hold it in place, which puts, rule of thumb, roughly 2 times my weight at the top. In reality, it's not that simple. You get into angles, and you get into the way the rope is routed, and you might be putting more than 2 times my weight up in that tree. Well, a lot of people say, well, that's fine, because I'm over 5 or 6 limbs. So if I've got 5 times my weight, now each one of those limbs is just seeing a piece of that. Well, in reality, that's not true either. You'll find when you put your weight on this system here, the limb that's going to see the most of that weight is right directly above you. Down here, you're going to see hardly anything. We've run tests on this and have some numbers on it, and it's staggering, the difference. And the weight on the limbs up at the top, depending on the angles of attachment, I mean, it changes drastically, okay? But the rule of thumb is twice my weight up top, okay? But I can start climbing here, no worries. Well, you already see the problem with this. It's already creeping up because I'm on a soaking wet beech tree that's nice and tapered, and it's just creeping up. And as I'm climbing, this rope is weighting and unweighting, and you see that it's moving around, okay? So the quick fix to that would be something that we all know from a woman named Josephine Hedger, multi-time world champion climber. But I recently discovered it was actually John Trenchard who came up with this, and Josephine's been taking the credit for it. Oh, Nick says it was him. All right, John, you thought it was you. Nick claims credit, so tough. I'm going to have to give it to Nick. So essentially what I'll do here is instead of the running bowline, I'm going to set up for a girth hitch, bring the rope back around, and now I'll do my running bowline here, and that will completely change the game on this, because now, I dropped the microphone. You can see what this does is I can now choke this from both directions, and that will firmly lock in place. So even on a finely tapered beach trunk that's soaking wet or full of ice, this actually will not ride up on me. So this is called a bidirectional running bowline. I used to think it was Josephine Hedger. Then I thought it was John Trenchard. Come to find out it was Nick Bonner the whole time. Okay, beautiful. Now, for those of you who set up this system thinking you can be lowered, guess what? You're still screwed because you can't be lowered. All right, this is still anchored at the base. How am I going to be lowered from this? Well, the way to do that is very, very, very simple. All I have to do is above my anchor point, I'm going to take a midline knot, in this case a alpine butterfly. Okay. And then I'm going to leave another sling at the base of the tree. Now, you'll notice that this sling is choked off. And typically, we don't recommend choking slings because that'll roughly half the strength of the sling. This particular sling, though, is a rhino sling, and it's been specifically designed to be choked. This one is actually stronger in a choke scenario than it is in a basket. That's for another day, though. So what I can do here is I could leave my D4 down here at the ready, or I could just have it in my rescue kit with another rope. Because as I'm climbing up over here, if my climber gets into trouble, I could then come over with the second rope. We'll just use the tail end of this guy. And we will put a cinching anchor on this. And let's go 3. Okay. Cinching anchor. So I could come over, I could hook this directly onto that midline alpine that I left. I could come over to this D4. And now, if you're doing this, obviously you have to make sure your rope is engineered for a D4. Typically it takes an EN 1891 type A rope, so you just have to be wary of that. Okay. So now in this situation, I've added on a D4. So if I can create some slack in here, it would allow me to untie that bidirectional running bowline. Nick, can you just put some pressure on this line here, please, if you don't mind?
I'm great at pressure, Rich.
Cheers. So one way to do that is I could come over and I could put a hand ascender right here. Now, I already know what some of you are saying. I'm introducing a tooth ascender into the system, and you're right. So this may not be the best option, but if it's my only option, you better believe I'm going to use it. Okay? A better option would be to use a non-tooth ascender of some sort, or shoulder hurts. Could come over here, and I could take a sling, and we could just create a midline anchor, and really, I could probably already have this installed on the system, so it's ready to go. We'll just do a little clem heist up the line, drop that down, slide that up, reroute the line from beneath the D4, and now, because I've got my foot ascender on, I'm just going to very easily advance that up. So what that's done is just created slack, so I can come over here and untie this setup.
Would it have worked if we just put another carabiner through right here, Rich?
Right there, potentially, yeah, but this way is a little bit better because it just gives me more to play with. Okay, now I do want to put a stopper on this, obviously. You can do any number of different things. I'm just going to do an overhand because it doesn't really matter at this point. Okay, and now I've got my victim on my 2-person load-ready device, even though holy hell, that used an awful lot of equipment. Boy, that took an awful lot of time. That's pretty crazy. I'm not going anywhere near it. Well, you don't have to do it this way. One of the ways we typically teach this setup is when this is anchored down in a completely separate bag, I've got a doubled rope setup hooked onto a pulley. And what I do is I come over, hook one end of my doubled rope down here, one end of it here, and you already have mechanical advantage built in on a doubled rope system. So all I have to do is pull up on the hitch, basically, to get that hitch to advance, and I could have done this much quicker. Okay? But you're thinking, ooh, doubled rope and single rope, oh, on the same system, ooh. Yeah, guess what? They get along just fine. I personally like this setup because this is in my rescue bag, this is my rescue bag. It's really clean to set it up. All I have to do is get that mechanical advantage to create that slack. And a lot of times you can do that just if you have a second person there. You don't have to rig up all this stuff. But it's a clean way to do it. That makes sense? Oh, well, what? Oh, what? So.
That is right there.
So essentially, to make something like this work, whether you use a D4, whether you use a doubled rope system, whatever you decided to hook on to this midline anchor to break into the system, really, it's going to require mechanical advantage. And MA stands for mechanical advantage. You might see that somewhere later, too, just saying.
Could be a test question.
Could be, probably not. So you're looking for mechanical advantage, okay, in order to break in and draw that up in order to untie this right here. So you saw that I had to set a separate anchor. I had to reroute the line and then basically step on it, which is why I like that setup, by the way. I'm using my strongest muscle to create that lift, nice and easy. Another way to do it would be to use a set mechanical advantage kit. Now these come in all sorts of shapes and colors and sizes and many different makes and models. And I'm getting fired again, aren't I? Because I'm mentioning. The fact is they all have associated positives and negatives and all have associated costs to them. Okay, there are some systems that are unbelievably efficient, really, really gorgeous, but cost so much that you could never afford to have it in your system anyway. So what I like about this particular kit is called the Hollerbeiner. Typical mechanical advantage kits consist of a carabiner hooked to a set of double pulleys, hooked to a heap of rope, hooked to another set of double pulleys, hooked to another carabiner. So you have a lot of links in the chain, and you better pray that all those links are there and configured the way they're supposed to be. If they ever get twisted, that system's not going to work for you.
And the difference in the links makes a huge difference. This has a much lower headspace.
Yep.
These can get a lot closer. Every time you add
Exactly.
a pulley hanging from a carabiner, you add 3 inches.
So what we've done here is we put the pulley sheaves directly on the carabiner frame itself, both 3 up top, 3 down low, and exactly as Nick's saying, what that allows is I've got less links in the chain. Slide this down a little bit. And if you can give me some pressure, sir. And this also has progress capture built in. So as I'm pulling up, it's grabbing that progress. I don't have to hold it in place. So here, to create that lift, you see how easy that is. That took absolutely nothing. And by the way, I could hook this onto my foot ascender as well. The really nice thing about the setup, again, as Nick was saying, it can draw all the way up because there aren't as many pieces. The other beauty here is under full load, this is one of the few systems, under full load I can just hold on with one hand and I can disengage the progress capture under full load. Almost every other system will utilize either a metal cam or a set of textile Prusiks that you must draw tension in order to disengage that progress capture. This one, you don't.
And if you get into that position where, you're confined space, or whatever you want to call it, where that headspace matters, if you lock those two together with traditional progress capture, you're not able to disengage it because there's nothing to draw in.
Exactly.
So it's a pretty big deal.
So you'll see more of this later in a very specific type of rescue called a pick-off rescue, where a lot of times every millimeter counts, especially if you get into rope access rescues. So the ability to draw it all the way in and release it under load is a beautiful thing. In this case, will this device work for this? Absolutely. Is it completely necessary? I would say in this scenario, no, because you saw how easy it was for me to create that lift with my leg. When I'm doing that lift with my leg, I'm still creating mechanical advantage. I'm just using my body to do it instead of a mechanical device.
A lot of people, I already saw commenting on the Facebook, and I'm sure have this question, and I'll admit I've helped popularize a a method similar to this where, you know, you might take the rope and cut it beneath this knot. You know, I'm certainly not going to say anything negative about that because I made a video and told everyone they should do it that way. So I tend to think that in the right situation, with the right setup and the right amount of safety margin, that something like that is acceptable. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yep.
Because I just know that a couple of people have asked about it, not necessarily supporting or condemning it. But
Sure. Again, we're talking about controlling as many variables as humanly possible. So could I, when this was all under full tension, if you can give me some tension again, Nick. When all this was under full tension, and this was anchored down here, could I not have just hooked on here and come in and snipped the rope right here? The answer is, of course you could. That is absolutely an option. But is it the best option? How difficult was it for me to rig up a different setup in order to lift and then untie versus cutting? The thing there is, if something messed up as I was creating that lift, this was still anchored down until I untie it. So I still have a measure of control even if this whole system I've incorporated goes sideways. If you cut this, and as you're cutting this, you accidentally nick this, well, guess what? You've got a line under tension. This rope will sever so damn fast it'll make your head spin. Any line under tension will do that. So for me personally, and this is really more of a personal issue, a lot of industries will tell you that cutting the rope is perfectly fine. It's a primary method of rescue in tower industries. They'll talk about cutting lines. Cave rescue, same thing. They talk about cutting lines all the time. Could you do it? Sure. Is it the best option? It all depends. And certainly there are knives that enable you to just isolate the line you want to cut to make sure that you're not going to accidentally cut another line. So it's really up to you and the variables you're willing to put in. Myself, if I practice this setup with the team and everybody on my crew knows how to run this setup and do it, it becomes fun really practicing it. Setting this, what we call a stomp-off mechanical advantage lift, is something that becomes fun. And it's very easy, and I'm not incorporating a whole lot of gear. I could, down here, I could have put a rope wrench system if I wanted to. You have a lot of options. So it's just identifying what works best for your crew, what you as a team have decided to roll with, and make sure you train on it and make sure everybody knows how to use it. Okay? So clearly, the best way to do all this stuff is to not ever have to do it, because I picked better limbs up here, and I've moved myself through the tree better, and I haven't caused an accident, and I'm using two hands on the saw at all times, so I never need to be rescued. Yes, sir?
We've got another question from Devin. Devin is, he asked, why is introducing a cam descender a bad idea? You
Excellent.
had referenced that. Can you just talk a little bit about some of the risks about using cam descenders?
Yep, that is an excellent question, sir. And in reality, it may not be a bad idea. Because in this situation, it's going to be relatively static. The issue with a cam descender, if you look at them, depending on the make of the descender, the teeth in here are going to be reasonably sharp. Now, some manufacturers are much sharper than others, much more aggressive. I find this particular set actually is really nice in terms of not being overly aggressive. Now, the way the cam works is when it's on the line, when I put weight on it, that cam is going to dig into the rope. So obviously, if I've got really, really sharp teeth in there, the more weight I put on that, the more that's going to dig into the rope. And again, I've got a rope under tension. And we just said that cutting a rope under tension can be quite easy. Now, is that overblowing it? Potentially. The chances of me desheathing this rope or damaging this rope are relatively slim, especially if I'm just doing a stomp off. Okay, I'm just rerouting the rope. I'm just taking my personal leg strength down and lifting the rope. Will it get to the point of severing? Most likely not. But again, if I have a better option, why wouldn't I use it? Okay. So in this scenario, which one's a better option? This one takes longer to set up, and I've got to locate the sling, and I've got to do it. This one slaps on nice and quick. Piece of cake. So which one is the better option here? Again, that's going to be a decision up to you. In my personal view, I'm not putting so much force into the system with that cam descender that I would feel comfortable using this. I could also use a rope grab, which I have somewhere. A non-tooth rope grab. You've probably seen them on your positioning lanyards. It's an excellent solution for that scenario as well. I could use a bunch of other devices, but the key is it may not be a problem to use a cam descender, but you do have other options that might work out better. Hope that answered.
I got a zinger for you here.
Uh-oh, a zinger.
Always unafraid to ask the tough questions. John Cole would like to know what your feelings are on climbing on unrated devices. And I'll expand a little bit on that because I think I know what John's talking about. And John, if I'm wrong, feel free to comment and tell me that I misinterpreted your question. But the early rope wrench, ZK1s.
Sure.
Gordon does the surveyor is making the bulldog bones,
Yeah.
the early akimbo models, early rope runner models. Obviously, as a manufacturer, you probably have a pretty hard line opinion on that, but you guys also do manufacture the rope wrench, which started as a garage project. What do you think about garage projects and their place in professional arborist industry?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, and it brings up a whole bunch of things that we can all come together. Man, we could spend 3 hours just on that. The fact is, all these unrated devices are one of the many things that I absolutely love about ARB. In my view, having worked with all the height disciplines now, in my view, nobody knows how to adapt a piece of equipment to the actual job they need to have done like an arborist technician. What I like to say is, hell, we buy a piece of equipment because it looks shiny. Typically, that's the truth. We buy it because it looks shiny, and we figure out how to use it later. And then we discover, oh, hell, I paid too much money for this. I don't actually have an application for it. So you invent an application for it. Now, this is one of the many reasons why every other height industry looks at arborists as a bunch of crazy cowboys. And in a certain aspect, that's not a bad thing, to a point. You really need to start looking at the overall system setup. And when I tell someone when they're learning how to tie a climbing hitch, I tell them you don't want to memorize what that hitch looks like. You want to know why it works. So in a rope wrench setup, I can take a rope wrench setup. Well, it's not set up, but when I look at a rope wrench setup, I realize that the life support in the system is the hitch. The hitch is still there in a rope wrench setup. All I'm doing is putting in something above it that's going to take friction off of my hitch. It's going to spread that out. Okay? So in my view, yes, we were involved with the rope wrench at a very, very early on. The second I saw the Fate revolver system from Mr. Bingham, I knew the world was going to change for us. And I'm thrilled that Kevin then took it the next step with the rope wrench. So I can look at the components of that system, see how they all work together, and what I would say, and this is sort of off the record on live TV, so I guess it's not exactly off the record. Between me, you, and everybody listening. What I would say is in a doubled rope setup, I test my hitch, I know my hitch is going to hold me, but then I go over a series of limbs. And I'm in a moving rope setup here. So every time I go over a limb, I'm incorporating more friction into the setup, which means my hitch is not seeing the same amount of friction here as it did when I was in a straight line to my anchor point. Well, the rope wrench eliminates that. So in the rope wrench setup, I still have the hitch as the primary life support, and that rope wrench completely and totally makes it so my hitch is consistent throughout no matter what I do. So looking at the components, and also we've got a heap of testing on this. There was a lot of questions about the actual testing that was done. I can assure you, this device has met every stipulation within EN 12841, other than the fact that it utilizes a hitch, and that's where the question comes in. So, taking that same philosophy and looking at some of the other devices, the Unisender. The Unisender was one of the first, well, the first really, multi-sending device out there that had the ability to ascend and descend. And when you look at how that functions and the way that that creates friction on the line, you can see what it does. You can see how it operates. You can see where the potential issues are if the coils come out. So it can, you can put numbers on it, you can test it, you can run it through all the various standards to test it, but instinctively an arborist can look at that and know. So with the bulldog bone, with the rope runner, all those devices, there is an element of that, of not being rated. But at the same time, you can sort of see how they work. So I sort of didn't answer that question, but sort of, the fact is, for me personally, I just like the performance of a hitch over a mechanical.
The key is to just talk for at least 3 minutes after you're asked a question, and that'll almost always constitute an answer. So
no matter what you say.
You know, I want one of these D4s. You made me want one pretty bad, but I'm not going to lie, I already have one. I think I actually have two. But I want to give one away to one of the people that are watching. So we've got a little challenge for you. If you watched the Taylor Hamill webinar, you may have some expertise in these types of questions, but what we're going to ask you to do is the winner is going to be the first person who posts all of the letters in the alphabet except for the letters contained in ISC and Rich Hattier. But you have to write the alphabet backwards, omitting those letters. So whoever posts that in the comments feed first is going to win an ISC D4 two-person load-rated device that they can use for rescues and all sorts of cool crap. So all of the letters in the alphabet backwards in order, omitting the letters in ISC and Rich Hattier. So go ahead and do that. Rich is getting ready for his next topic, and we're going to give away one of those D4s, okay? Cool, thanks. Rich, I got to go read the people's comments.
All right, sweet. I can't find it, but I had a device that you don't have, Nick. Ah, there it is. Well, while Nick is looking at that, I'm going to show you something that he hasn't seen. Sucker. So this device is the D4 Pro. It is the exact same device as the D4. The only difference is this one does not have the panic feature on it. So for those of you who have been using a Petzl rig or using a device that does not have a panic feature, this device now has all the same function of the standard D4, just without the panic feature. Chip Hildreth, if you're listening, this is the one that you want, sir. I know it. And say hi to Nora for me, please. Okay.
Victor Lazar says he'll just buy one. That sounds way too difficult. Hey, if you want it, you got to work for it. I mean, that's like a $200 retail price item. I'd write the alphabet backwards for that.
Okay, almost done. What we're going to do is we're going to run through that last rescue one more time just to show it again, in case it thoroughly confused somebody, which is entirely likely. Of course, the key to all these aerial rescue scenarios is practice. Really, every single last technician within arboriculture should be trained for aerial rescue. And what I would highly suggest is that with your particular team, you just work out the system that's best for you. You could hook a double rope system here. You could be on a D4 straight out. There's 1,000,010 different ways of doing this. We're only looking at a few of them here. Now, when you want that 9-hour class, we're not doing that as a live event, by the way. I'll run through many more options on various techniques for doing all of this. Okay. So, are we ready to keep going? Ready to keep going. So, I mentioned a little while ago, one of the nice things about a Basal Anchor setup is I can incorporate more ropes into the system. So before we do that, let me run through that last rescue one more time, just to show you what happened. So what I did is I set up my rope over my limbs, multiple limbs that can all handle more than 2-person load, hopefully. Of course, we never know because none of them are rated. Brought it back down. I anchored it to the base with a bidirectional running bowline of John Trenchard / Nick Bonner fame. Sorry, Josephine, apparently you're out of the picture. Okay, and then what I did is, I set a midline alpine here, and in this case I'm going to leave my mobile anchor right on. So it's just a webbing sling with a clem heist. So as I'm climbing up over here, absolutely no worries. Everything's going nice and smooth, and here we go. Something happened, I need to be rescued. So my team can come over, and we've practiced this many times. In a bag, what I've got set up is a D4 with a line running through it. So all I have to do is come over here, hook on that D4. Another really nice function of the D4, if I need to feed out line, I can just depress this little cam right here, feed out as much line as I need to get to this anchor. Then I can pull out the slack, hopefully. Oh, look at that. Who caught me setting this up backwards? I did that just for your pleasure. And someone's going to say, obviously, some of these other devices require putting a redirect in for friction to handle 2-person load. Well, one of those devices has a method to stop this from being loaded backwards, okay, which this one does not. So this is what we consider a device for professional technicians. You must train yourself on how to rig the rope, okay? So here we go. I can pull out as much rope as I need to anchor on. I can pull out the slack until it's taut. And then from here, I can just redirect the line, bring it down through, hook it onto my foot ascender, which then allows me to just walk the rope up. Okay? And by doing that, it gives me enough room to untie this knot here. Okay, I can pull all that out. I do want to put a stopper knot in here just to make sure, even though I'm on a fixed knot, so I really technically don't need one, but just to be safe, why not? And then I can lower my victim out on the D4 itself. So, looks strange, sure. Difficult, not at all. And it gives me, in my view, it gives me a lot of benefits. And the fact that until I actually need it, there's zero clutter at the base of this tree. All that stuff is sitting in the bag, ready to go right by it, but it's not actively engaged on the line. Okay? Only in the event of needing it do I have it there. So what other options do I have for setting up a lowerable system? Well, I could just run straight down to the D4 itself. In that case, I don't have to do any lifting. Let me get this guy off the line. Let me get this guy off the line. Okay, we're not going to need that, but I'll leave that. Nah, we'll take it out for now. There is another reason why I might leave a midline anchor in later. So what I could do is I could just run the line down, run it through my D4, lock the device off. In this case, I'll take a half hitch above, and then typically I'll anchor that down with another carabiner, just to have a positive lock on the whole thing. And I'll start climbing. In the event I need to be rescued, take off the positive lock, pull out that half hitch, and I can lower up my victim. Absolute piece of cake. So sort of a modification, less pieces. The difference here is as I'm climbing around on this, you'll notice that this device is potentially moving on the base of the tree. Now it's a D4, it's all metal, so it's going to be able to handle that. But it's something I have to make sure that it resets properly. So I've got to communicate to my person on the ground, hey man, I just went through a redirect, I need to reweight this, is it all set properly? So there's a lot of going back and forth in this, and this is why I tend to prefer to have just that static anchor with the midline. But there is a big benefit to this style of setup in the fact that if ever I wanted to add multi-lines into the system, it's an absolute piece of cake to do so. So here, as I'm pulling my rope up the tree, I'll come over here and do a midline alpine over here. And I'm going to hook a completely separate line to the system. Now, usually what I would do in this scenario is I need another HMS to do it. Because I've got a cinching anchor here and a non-cinching anchor up top, I would typically add a second carabiner so that they're opposite and opposed. Everybody see that? I'm sure it's a lot easier to do it with ovals. These are the only ones I have on hand to do it. The reason being, this is not a cinching anchor up top right here, so I want to make sure there's no chance it can rotate onto the gate. This is a cinching anchor at the bottom, so I'm not as concerned there. And the beauty is, I can now pull that up, set it exactly where I want it, and then I can anchor it down. And you're thinking to yourself, yeah, great. Why the hell did you go through all that trouble? Well, we talked a little bit about that doubled rope setup over here, where before I started climbing, I set a separate access line in order to be rescued. Well, in a basal anchor setup, you see how easy it is to add a second rope into the equation. Super, super simple. Okay? So technically, I've got another rope here available for access or rescue. But what's the problem with that? We talked about one of the downsides of basal anchor is if I put 100% of my weight on this side, I've got 100% there, so I've potentially doubled the weight up here. Well, imagine having two people on this side now. I've got me and I've got Nick, which means I've got me and I've got Nick right there, which means up there I've got me, Nick, Nick. Okay, so I've potentially quadrupled the load up there. And really, it's not that clean. More than likely, I put more than 4 times the force, especially on the limb directly above me. Okay? So usually in this situation, you're not going to recommend that a second climber hops up here. The beauty is, it's so easy to fix that. All I have to do is as I'm ascending up that tree, I eventually get to a point where I can inspect the limb. Actually, I'm not going to use a Dyneema limb or a sling because it doesn't have any stretch. In this case, I do want to have a little bit of stretch. I'll use a normal sling. At any point in that tree, I can set up a sling. So let's say about 50, 60, 70 feet up. As I'm ascending up this line, I decide to take this one, put a midline anchor, and connect it in. Okay? So now I'm climbing on this one over here. Oh, I get in trouble. I need to be rescued. What I've done by locking off this second side is now when my rescuer comes up this access line, how much weight are they putting on the top of the tree? Absolutely none, because we've made this a fixed anchor right here. So really, up here is just seeing 2 times the weight, my weight, roughly, give or take. Okay? And my rescuer's line is completely out of all that. Now, my rescuer might get to this point and have to proceed higher. That's fine. At least he got started there. Or potentially, he can get this and come right over to me and rescue me off of that line. Okay? So by adding the second line into the system, which was unbelievably easy to do, using a basal anchor setup, I could then fix one side of that, and it becomes my rescuer access line. You'll see a little bit later, hopefully if we have time to get to it today, where that might also become my secondary climbing system. I could have an independently anchored rope wrench right here, and I could have an independently anchored rope wrench right here, and I could be using both of them at the same time. I don't want to freak anybody out just yet, but that is a very real possibility, and it allows us also to climb with a bit of backup. Okay? So make sense? Very easily, just by putting a midline anchor or midline alpine into the system, I can attach a separate rope. I would want to make sure that if I'm not on a cinching setup, that I would have 2 carabiners with the gates opposite and opposed, and I can pull that back down. And in order to make this a safer for rescue setup, I would want to lock off one of the sides. Incidentally, this is also a fantastic setup for having 2 climbers in one tree with one setup. Let's say I'm really good with throw ball and Nick isn't. Well, we know that to be true already. But this way, I could get the throw ball shot in, set 2 lines, boom, anchor, fix one of these as I go setting up there, piece of cake, good to go. And as I'm climbing down through the tree, when my climbers cross lines, there's absolutely no drag on the lines, no textile to textile friction, so you're good to go. So just a really handy setup there. Make sense? Okay. I want to show you one more thing in regards to a basal anchor. Again, we could talk all day on this. My poor wife gets to listen to me talk all day on this, and in my sleep. But we sort of mentioned a little bit earlier about the idea of, well, I don't necessarily want to get my throw ball all the way into the top of the tree because I can't actually guarantee what I'm going to come across when I get there. Okay? And the idea is it might make some sense to actually set my line a little bit lower. Again, we go through the longer class. I'll show you 1,010,000 different ways of advancing your system to where setting it lower really becomes easy and advancing it becomes super easy. But I'm going to pull this out real fast. Any questions while I'm going through this? Any questions popping up over there? Nah.
Just joined.
Excellent, go for it.
If you haven't heard, we were instrumental in helping start a charity this year called the Fallen Families Fund. It provides direct cash assistance to families and individuals that have been impacted by an injury or a death through their association in arboriculture. So, God forbid if you or a family member were ever disabled, there's an opportunity for you to get a cash grant. You can go to fallenfamiliesfund.org to look at that. We filed the paperwork and incorporated as a full 501c charity or 501c3, whatever it is.
Yep.
So that's all taken care of. And 100% of the administrative costs of charity are paid for by the company. So any money that we receive through fundraising, whether that's on the front of the website or if you mail us a check or anything, goes directly into those grants that benefit people. So fallenfamiliesfund.org, that's something that you guys will hear me talk about, and hopefully a lot of other people talking about very, very many times in the coming months. So sorry for that very, very many. I didn't like that. Anyways, yeah, so stay tuned for that, and please check it out, fallenfamiliesfund.org. Did I fill enough time for you, Rich?
Perfect.
Perfect.
Absolutely perfect. Deep-a-dee. And for you poor, unfortunate people sitting there watching, thinking, yet again, you might get bourbon out of me. Ain't gonna happen. I'm going to test my hitch so that it holds me positively and immediately. So in this case, what I've done is I've set my Basal Anchor set up, but I clearly did not set it at the top of the tree for a reason. Again, I cannot inspect 80 feet in the air from the ground. I cannot inspect it perfectly. So I'm going to take the limb that I think I want to eventually tie into, and I'm going to come at least one limb down, possibly even two limbs down, just to add that extra element of safety in. Is it a guarantee of safety? Absolutely not. But the chances of it being stronger lower down is virtually 100%. Okay? Clearly not 100%. So in this case, you'll see that my basal anchor is actually set up right here. Well, if that's as high as you can throw, you might want to consider a different line of work. But in this case, it'll serve our purpose. And this answers two things at one time, because one of the questions that comes up with the basal anchor setup is, how do I advance it? And we're about to show you that. And there's one super, super key element of this that will turn out to be beautiful for you. So in this case, I did not set this up to be lowerable. Okay? We sort of talked about that, but we haven't fully talked about it. Let's go into that for a second. What are the two main reasons for having to perform an aerial rescue in a tree? Well, I can hear people answering. I can't see it, but I can hear it. The first one is going to be a chainsaw cut. All right? I've cut myself with a chainsaw so bad to the point that I can't lower myself down. You're going to have to come up and get me. But I set myself up in a lowerable system. We'll just pretend I did here. No worries. My ground guy can come over. He can undo the backups. He can lower me out of the tree. No worries, right? Right? Because if I'm using a chainsaw, what else am I typically using in that case? Am I going to sit here with one attachment point with no other attachments to this tree as I'm using this chainsaw with one hand? Clearly not. Typically what I'll be doing is I'll have at least a work positioning lanyard on. I might have it set to a lower position to balance even better. But typically I'll have some form of lanyard on, to get myself in a better position to where I can have two hands on that saw. So now I've cut myself, but I'm on a lowerable system. Can you lower me out of that tree if I've got this lanyard on the limb? The answer is no. Okay? So that immediately completely blows out the whole idea of you setting this whole system up for rescue because it can be lowered. So what's the second scenario where I might need to be rescued in the tree? Well, let's say I'm doing my best James Kilpatrick impersonation, and I'm flying through this tree with the greatest of ease, using my dreadlocks to grab onto the limbs as I'm going by. And let's say I accidentally dislodge a dead limb up here, and it comes sailing down the rope, and it cracks me on the head. Ugh. Okay? So now I'm knocked out on this line, and I need to be rescued. Well, the good news is that I don't have my lanyard on in that case. So you can come over. Because I set up a lowerable system, you can just lower me straight to the ground. Solid. Very nice. The problem is that when that limb hit my head, it severed my spine 3/4 of the way through. and now you're pinballing me down through all these limbs as you're lowering me. So by the time I get to the ground, my spine is now severed 100% through, and I'm paralyzed, which is good for you because I can't kick your ass for breaking my spine. It's bad though. Well, clearly it's bad because now I'm paralyzed, okay? The fact is, in a rescue like that, if you know there's a neck injury or suspect there's a neck injury, typically you're going to get to that victim, you're going to stabilize them, and you're not going to move them unless you absolutely have to. Well, typically you're going to have to eventually, but if you can get a neck brace on them first, you're going to be much better served, okay? So just automatically lowering them to the ground is not going to be the best scenario there. Ideally, having an attendant with that victim, lowering down with that victim is going to be a much better way to go, okay? So in many cases, in my view, lowerable systems are a bit overblown. But I showed you how just by adding a midline alpine, I can have this set up and ready for rescue to be lowered. But for the most part, I'm not going to have a device down there to do the job. Make sense? Again, this is just personal preference. Everybody's different. So now, here we go. I'm going to start climbing up this tree. Of course, I told everybody on the site, even though it's not a rescue scenario, but I'm climbing, and you get the communication back that you're climbing. So I'll get myself up to a reasonable point in this tree, and now I need to go higher, okay? So I've got a lot of options in this case. Well, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to connect my lanyard. And when I connect my lanyard, I'm going to want to run it to my forward attachment points. And there's a reason for that. If I were to fall in this scenario, I don't want to be held by my kidneys. If you've ever tried being held by your kidneys for any length of time, you find out you start pissing blood pretty quick. Okay, so you're better off anchoring yourself to the front. And what I would also recommend is having 2 attachment points is not a bad idea. Now in this case, I'm not going to fully disconnect from the system, so I'm going to use this as one of my anchor points. This is my second anchor point. If I were to disconnect from this entirely, I would want another sling to go over and attach to this tree so I have 2 anchor points. Just because anytime you're moving, anytime you're transitioning, it's better to have 2 if you can do it. Okay? But in this case, I'm really just going to elevate this line. I'm going to leave it attached. And I've got 2 options to do that. One option would be to take a webbing sling, run it up over a higher limb, okay. I've run that up over a higher limb, so now I can take this system and I can just elevate it, connect it to that carabiner, and I'm good to go. Okay? That's one method of advancing a basal anchor. And I did it by using what we would call a dynamic redirect here. Really, I just put a sling, carabiner, ran it through. So in this case, I still have a basal anchor. 100% of my weight on this side of the system, 100% of my weight on the back side of the system. So this is roughly seeing twice my weight. That's one way to do it. But the nice thing is, that's not your only option. What I could do, instead of running a dynamic redirect, is I could run a static redirect. And this will be a question for if you want to give something out. The question's coming right now.
Ooh, good question. What do we
Wait, I'll tell whatever. Yeah, we could do that. So the question is, by running a static redirect up to this anchor, what benefit does that give me in terms of rescue? And I'll give you a few seconds to take a look around and to see what I'm doing here.
Oh, I know the answer.
Okay, so I ran a static redirect off of my basal anchor. So I'm still attached to here. I've advanced my system. But now I need to be rescued. And let's say I'm no longer, well, let's say I am lanyarded in here. So you couldn't lower me anyway. What can you do now that you couldn't do a minute ago? You can't answer that question, Nick. Nobody has it?
Let's give them a minute. I actually have something else that I want to give away.
Okay.
Not give away, but something that you can get. So, I've been shamelessly plugging our Fallen Families Fund all night, and I just found this Husqvarna 550 XP Powerhead laying around. This is as is. I'm going to qualify that right now, okay? I don't think there's anything wrong with this. Doesn't smell like there's ever been gas or oil in it, but it might not work at all. So if you end up with this and it doesn't work at all, that's on you, not on me. If you go to the Tree Stuff website, on the front of it, you'll see a donation opportunity for fallen families. Like a silent auction, whoever donates the most today, that's before midnight, today on the 24th, I'll mail this to you tomorrow. Okay, so only one person's going to get it, and you might donate $1 less than the person who got it, and you won't get it, and that'll still be okay. So please only do this if you're okay with making a donation, and whoever donates the most will get this 550 XP power head that I think works, but might not. Okay? It's very nice. It's clean. It's in good shape. Never been any gas or anything in it, I don't think. I just, it doesn't have a box or any instructions, or doesn't come with anything that you don't see right here, okay? So, treestuff.com, Fallen Families donation, biggest donation by midnight today on the 24th. We'll get this mailed out to them tomorrow. Pretty cool.
Excellent. That's a terrific opportunity. Okay, has anybody come up with the answer yet? Kale?
The resounding answer is that there is a second access.
Ah! Bam! Whoever
So,
came up with that first.
First person who answered to that effect, and they will be the winner.
Perfect. The key is, when I took that Basal Anchor that was right here and raised it up with a static redirect, I fixed one side of this. By fixing one side of it, I actually fixed the back side of it, which means there's now total slack back here. So you could go down, untie that bidirectional alpine or bidirectional running bowline, and you now have access to come right up to me. So that's really, really important, because a lot of people say basal anchors can be really dangerous because you could cut the rope. There's all sorts of dangerous aspects to it. And sure, those are all things you must bear in mind. But one thing I would say about a basal anchor is pretty much the most dangerous thing you're going to do is that initial ascent into a tree, okay? Because you haven't had the ability to fully inspect that tree. You inspected it from the ground, sure, but you might get 20, 30 feet up that tree and realize there's a power line that you didn't see somehow, okay? Or a hornet's nest that you didn't see, or just something that you didn't see, okay? So potentially you might need to be lower down on that initial ascent up. So having a lowerable system there is great. But invariably, once you get into the tree, you find one of the other downsides of basal anchors is they're less efficient because there's more rope in the system, a bit of rope stretch, so you tend to switch to a canopy anchor. Well, this gives you the best of both worlds. I started on a basal anchor a little bit lower because I couldn't quite fully inspect that entire tree, but it was very easy for me to A, advance it, and B, turn it into a canopy anchor here, or a static anchor to where I now have access for rescue. So I've taken my basal anchor, turned it into a canopy anchor. Okay, now obviously I'm going to have to retrieve this at some point, so there are other ways of getting around that, and that's a whole nother day. But the idea is I'm thinking safety, I'm thinking my own rescue. I'll ascend up this tree, eventually get it set, and I can anchor this off to, as I'm working the tree, I've got an avenue for rescue. Make sense? All right, sweet. I'll stop talking about it. And I will take it all apart.
Rick Benbow says, any concerns about the anchor point?
In this particular case, well, this is an aluminum.
Anchor point, and I just want to say, what up, Ricky D?
Well, certainly, what up, Ricky D? If he's talking about in a basal anchor setup, we did cover the fact that you are putting much more stress on the top of this tree. Even though you have 5, 6, 7 limbs in the scenario, you're not evenly spreading that weight all along, okay? So if his actual question is, now, when I set this redirect, am I concerned about that anchor point? Well, the fact is, I inspected that limb where I put that redirect. Typically, I'm putting it around the trunk itself, just nestled in one of the branches to hold it in place. So I'm putting it on the strongest attachment point that I can find that I can physically inspect right then and there before I consider the fact that it's going to have 2-person load. So do I consider it? Absolutely, Rick. Absolutely 100%. And everybody should before they make a decision like that to make sure that you're making the best decision you can. Hopefully that answered him. Of course, Ricky's got another way to do rescue. He just grabs a rope, pulls the whole damn tree over, disconnects the climber, good to go. But not all of us have those incredible T-Rex arms of his. Okay, any questions on that? And we can go over that a million more times if we like. Okay, so now what I'm going to need is I'm going to need my handy-dandy rescue victim back, which would be Nick. Because what we'll get into next, we've talked a little bit about doubled rope rescue. Yep, please. We showed some rescues earlier where Nick was in a doubled rope setup or moving rope setup, and I was able to come up a line right next to him. And we did it two ways. First way I did it with a hitch. Second way I did it using a two-person load-rated device. And something we didn't talk about there is certainly there is the ability. We talked about control, having a hand on either hitch. There are methods of putting something above a hitch to where you can remotely operate that hitch. Again, in my personal view, and Rick, sorry, you're probably not going to like it. In my personal view, the idea of control in that scenario is really not as good as people might think. It looks cool as hell in competition. Guaranteed it looks cool as hell. But the actual control, in my mind, isn't sufficient. Anyway, let's see here. Are there any questions coming up that people are really confused on or want to go over a little bit more?
You know, we've done a really good job of making time for questions on this webinar. That's certainly something that we've improved. So hopefully we're answering them as they come.
Well, if you've got questions, we're happy to answer them. Or I'm happy to tell you that you can call Nick to have it answered instead of me. Just kidding.
I answer quite a few technical questions.
Okay, so what we're going to look at now is we're going to look at this a little bit more from the perspective of a stationary rope climber, because there are some pretty unique things going on there. So what we'll do is we'll have two setups. All clear. Really, I just like making a mess with rope.
Well, that's okay.
That's what it boils down to.
I can pull that. It's well within my skill set.
Cheers. One more time. It's completely fixed. Now, of course, I'm putting all that force on that tight bend ratio, so like... Oh, restate the question. Question is, to show the setup, we had a sling to advance our system, and then we had the rope. So essentially we had that, and then pretty much we had this.
Do you got a wrench for me, Rich?
Right over there. Because I'll need this other one. So here's what we had. The question was, are you concerned about this bend radius being too tight?
No.
So two ways to look at that. One would be, if I could change that, sure, why not? If I have time or the equipment to add a second carabiner in there, why not? But the fact is, this is not running. This is completely fixed. So once it's completely fixed, I'm not putting any more stress on it than would normally be the case. If this were running, if that were a running rope in that scenario, I would be much, much more concerned on it because of the pressures coming down. But because it's fixed, I'm not as concerned. And obviously, you want to line this up to where the gates would be away from the trunk. If I had a second carabiner, could I put it in there? Absolutely. Hell, I could go opposite and opposed with two triple acting carabiners, and then, I mean, that's the other thing with a lot of the safety talk is where do you stop? I mean, we could add heaps and heaps and heaps of gear into this, does it make it any more safe as I keep adding all of those pieces of equipment? Not necessarily. There's certainly an element to where you're not getting the return back. So in an ideal situation, sure, I'd much rather have that. Do I have to have it that way? I'm pretty comfortable climbing off of the 2 statics just there. Yep. Excellent question. Any other questions coming up before we go up? Okay. No more questions. Okay, I'm going to set a little bit more stuff up here. Nick's going to kick me a few times. Uh-oh. Now I got a radio in the way. Almost ready.
Am I not responsive still, Rich?
All right. Oh, not responsive at all.
I'm not responsive to
No comment from you, buddy. I never thought of it that way. That's
Yeah.
a really good way to...
Otherwise, I'd be yelling, "Help me, Rich, help me!"
Yeah, well, of course, in a rescue, when you get to the victim, everything's fair game at that point. Not only is all the gear on your harness now my gear, because, hey, it's your fault you're in this mess.
Hey, if you need it, you need it.
I'm taking it. But if you start getting mouthy with me, yeah, you better believe there's going to be issues.
Getting a mouthful of gut.
Yep. Okay. So in this scenario, we've got poor Nick up there. Okay. And this time he's gone up on a stationary rope system. It could be any type of stationary rope system. It doesn't matter. And what I'm going to do is we can play this step by step. How are we doing on time, by the way? About an hour? Yeah. I'm getting all tangled up in my damn... Ugh.
We probably want to go 30 more minutes, and then take questions.
Okay. Well, if we're going to go 30 more minutes, and what I'm... no wonder this is getting all crazy. What I'm going to do is not show one of these methods. Nick can hook that on. Because clearly, one of the ways I could rescue him here is I could send up my stationary rope system, I could get to him, and doing much like you're used to seeing in every other aerial rescue setup, I can just anchor to him, I can have one hand on his hitch, one hand on my hitch, and we can descend. Now, we talked about that, how much control I actually have in that scenario, and a lot of times you might have enough control. It's not that big of a deal, especially with a rope wrench, because the rope wrench regulates the hitch so well. The need to have a brake hand is greatly lessened if you're using something like the rope wrench. Okay? So we could very easily do that style of rescue. But what we're going to do instead is we're going to take a look at going to that 2-person load-rated system. Okay? So here I will set up my, because this is a long ascent, I'm going to go ahead and set up my rope wrench just to show you how we can transfer. Now, if this were a shorter ascent, let's say Nick was only 20 feet in the air or something, I would more than likely just go my rad system straight on the D4. But in this case, I won't. And I can hear you suckers sitting right now thinking you're going to get a bourbon out of me, and I'm telling you, I'm happy to share my bourbon with you. I'm just not going to give you one for that. I'm sure all of you test your hitches every time before you ascend. Yep. Doubled rope climbers too.
I certainly do.
Well, this is the most you've climbed in how long now, Nick?
Next question.
Excellent. Okay. So now I can set my rope wrench for ascent. Now let's say I've got a real long ascent. Of course I can come over here and I can get all freaky with my knee ascender set up. I can do all of that, okay? I would just ascend up the line and then I would transfer to a D4. Well, we don't have to go that high, so I can leave this here.
It's so slick how you have that stowed there.
But I am an arborist, and I love having gear hanging off of me, so...
If you think that that's slick, how he has that, turn around and show them that. If you think that that storage of the knee ascender is slick, Hit the like button for me. That's cool.
So,
Hit the like button for me, Kale. I want to make sure my like's on there.
so to make that happen, pretty clearly, something we haven't talked about, I'm using a full body harness here. Now, of course, a lot of this is bled over the fact that I do so much work in other height disciplines that require full body. But what I'm finding is more and more and more and more, this makes more sense anyway. And you should get used to it, because already working platforms, you're required to have a 5-point harness. It's not going to be long, I wouldn't think, before all arborists are required to have them. Now, for those skinny-shouldered little guys like Drew who say, oh, it's too hot, suck it up, all right? Sorry, Drew.
I thought there was going to be like a way to abate the hotness, but no, just suck it up.
No, love you, Drew, but get used to it.
It was somewhat colder, buddy.
Okay. So now I can ascend up. And the nice thing about this, when I don't have a blown up shoulder, the nice thing about this is I can ascend quite quickly to get to my victim to do that initial assessment. So let's say my victim had an issue where I had to clear his breathing. Well, that was a pretty wobbly ascent, but I have no weight down there, and you get the idea. I could very easily run 60 feet up to Nick, get to a spot where I can start doing that initial assessment. Of course, before I left the ground, I told somebody that I was coming up. We activated the emergency response plan, all of that stuff.
I could run that 60 feet too, but easier than you,
Probably.
for sure.
I've seen you climb.
Easy.
You're a beast.
Easy.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to get to Nick. I'm going to make that initial assessment. And in this case, I see that, Nick's in pretty good shape. He's conscious. He can work with me. So I will attach to him just to make it, I have a little bit more control of the situation. And I could work both hitches on the way down. Okay, we could do that, sure. Or I could get to Nick and discover, oh hell, he's totally jacked up. He's not going to be able to descend on his own, and he's on a compromised system. I can't take him down on this one anyway, okay? But luckily, we had set this pre-installed access line that we set up purposely on a limb that can handle 2 persons' weight. I can get to Nick, I can make that initial assessment, and then I can get moving. So, before I connect to Nick in this case, because especially if he's on a compromised system, I'm going to move myself to that 2-person load-rated device first. It'd be really nice if my shoulder would stay in socket.
Too easy.
Yep. Okay. So you saw how easy that was for me to switch to a 2-person load-rated system. And I can just leave my rope wrench on the line. Okay. Now, I am going to grab it because I do need it for later, but you get the idea. We would be trucking along, moving right now. So you'll notice that I just locked my D4. So in this scenario, I would want it to be locked because as I'm moving around, if something were to accidentally happen, I wouldn't want to hit that handle and potentially move. Now, the D4 is really, really smooth in that aspect where it goes into panic, so the handle will move if I hit it to where I'm not going to be in trouble, but why not just lock it if you can? Okay? So now 2-person load-rated device. Now I can come over to Nick, and I can connect him to the spine side. Let me connect it to me first, it'd be a little bit easier. Again, I'm going to connect him to the spine side of my carabiner. Connect that to Nick, if I can get it to him. There we go. So now, does anybody see what just happened?
I did.
We did this on purpose, you see. What just happened is my handle went up through that carabiner. We did that on purpose just to show you that you do need to make sure that everything is aligned properly. Don't you love how that works? Mr. Denbo, you can stop laughing now.
I'm just proud that Denbo's watching.
Okay.
Who would have thought I'd be teaching you, Rick?
Okay, so here I can start lowering Nick's system, and obviously this carabiner is not aligned properly, so I know that it's going to lower down onto a resting setup, but I can control all that with no shock to the system. I can very easily get him to the point to where I can disconnect the system. And there we go, he's off. little rope management, get that out of the way. Okay, now, if Nick had a little chest ascender or had a hook or something, I could grab onto that, slap that right on here as well, which is really nice.
You are using your feet to support me. I want to point that out, though.
I am using my feet, sure.
And if I was prone here, I mean, you wouldn't necessarily be supporting me, but you'd be controlling me with them.
Sure. But almost every stationary rope climber has got some sort of chest lanyard that I can take, hook it right onto here to bring your victim into a much better seated position. Okay? And then again, total control of the whole scenario. I can come over, activate my device, and I'm going to leave you suspended again. I can bring him down, and then I can walk myself out of the system, leaving him suspended. Excellent job, sir.
I am excellent at getting in trouble and needing rescued. Carson can attest to that.
Okay, looked a little confusing maybe? Not much different than what we did over here with the doubled rope system.
Thank you, Rick.
Oh, you're not done yet, sir.
Oh, not done?
No. No. Not even remotely done. So that was very similar to what we did on the doubled rope rescue. Because Nick was in a descent position, I could just lower him down. Well, even if he had been ascending, let's say he had his knee ascender on and his foot ascender on, he's still technically on a descent system. So all I would have to do is get to him, detach his knee ascender, detach his foot ascender, and then he's in a descent scenario. So very easy to lower him right onto me. Pretty clean?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, because we only have a little bit more time left, we're going to show one more rescue, and this one's going to be a bit further out there, to say the least. Actually, there's two questions we had to go over real quick before we do that. Another thing we could have done here to further control the situation, when I had two-person load on this, but I also had this line here. Let's say we determined that this line was not compromised, and I could use it, okay? It's still, in my view, better to bring him onto me, so I had better control. But something I also could have done there is I could have incorporated a backup device. And I could have put this over to Nick's line. Okay. So there are many styles of backup devices. This particular one is called the ISC Rocker, RP500. This is designed to work with up to a 13 mil line. And you'll see that this is what we call a trailing device. So when I'm using it smoothly, it'll go up and down the rope, no worries. But if I move too quickly, it's going to cam on the line and it's going to stop. So in that scenario where I had Nick and myself on this line, I could have also set this backup on the other side just for further protection. Okay? Are all arborists going to use this type of device? Absolutely not. But where this becomes useful, which it doesn't sound like we'll have time for today, is let's say we get into using two individually anchored stationary rope systems, and I'm ascending on one, I could have a backup on the other, so I could be protected on the way up, and then install a second rope wrench up here. Okay? Sounds like this might be for another day.
Another webinar? Okay, we might have to bring Kevin in for a
Actually,
double stationary rope.
Kevin's wife is very pregnant. That's the only reason he wasn't here. Otherwise, he would have been here.
That's like number, 12, 13 for him?
And they're all going to be badass climbers. You know it.
And gorgeous.
Congratulations, Kevin and Emily, by the way. So the ISC Rocker, this is a two-person load-rated backup device. Okay? And again, this is what we call a trailing device. So it'll trail up and down the line smoothly, and it'll cam when you need it. Another nice little feature here is this gray bar. It allows you to put it in park. So let's say I got up to my victim. I could install this above you, your system, so that I have backup, and it's parked in that case. It's static. So I could eliminate all fall factor.
Well, people are going to want to know, and I don't even need to see the screen, but can I use this as an anchor? Could I build a climbing system off this?
Sure. Now,
Could I put a spike underneath here still?
You should, because this will slip, obviously. This is not a tooth cam, and this will slip. So in that situation over there, potentially you could have used this to create your midline anchor. Now, that being said, one of the downsides to this device is on a fully tension line, if I don't have it in park, it is very difficult for it to grab. So there are other devices you might want to consider there,
Maybe a rope runner.
potentially. So, just to throw it up there because this will come up, you will see it. Excuse me? Two-person load, yep. There are other types of backup devices that are rated or work a little bit differently. The ISC Red, this one is a towable backup. So this one I install on the line, the only time it moves is when I manually slide it up or when I tow it down. So this would be used in conjunction with a descending device. I'd have my hand on the handle and this between my fingers and these. So in Sprat, rope access, other two-line setups, you would have a backup device on a separate line. So we're not going to get into that. It's not perfectly applicable for ARB, but I feel the rocker in a rescue scenario could be a worthwhile device for you to look at.
Cool.
Okay.
I, for one, appreciate all the insight that you bring from the Sprat and, IRATA and all that stuff, the rope access, and working with the fire departments. I think it's really interesting and refreshing.
It's super
for somebody
fun.
so widely knowledge, to share that with us.
And I would highly recommend every arborist start taking a look at those types of applications, Sprat in particular. But their whole mindset towards safety is something that is so utterly different than the way ARB operates that you'll benefit immensely. The techniques are useless in terms of arboriculture because we have a different work environment. Sure. But just the whole mindset, the whole approach to safety and the way they approach their work environment, you will gain a ton from it.
Am I going back up?
You're going back up.
All right.
And this is the last one.
Thank God.
And this is going to be the one that's going to be a little more unique. So in this case, actually I will do this with a rope wrench just to show you the transfer. So what we're going to look at here is every other height discipline, typically when they're rescuing, because they all work on stationary ropes, typically when they're rescuing, they're doing what's called a pick-off rescue. So what they end up doing is they end up coming underneath the climber. Again, they have two lines that they're working on, so their primary is not the climber's primary. But they'll come up to the victim, they'll pick the victim off of their system, especially when they're on a scent, and they'll put them on themselves. So in this situation, this is not, absolutely will not be my first method of rescue. I will go through every other option in the book to determine if I can do that first. If I can just lower them, I'm going that route. If I can get to them and lower them on their system, I may go that route. If I can get to them, they set me a line and I can lower them onto my two-person low rated, I'm going that route. The only time I would really consider doing a pick-off off of his line itself is if my victim's conscious. Because this is definitely a scenario where I need to know that his rope is functional and that he hasn't cut it and it's not compromised. Okay? I also need to know, Nick and I worked pretty well as a team here. Before he went up, we made sure that he was going to be on a limb that he felt could handle two-person load in the event that it had to. Okay? So we've already covered all that. If we hadn't covered all that, I'm looking up here at that limb thinking, oh man, can that handle two-person load or not? And if I don't know for damn certain, or at least really certain, I'm not doing this style of rescue. I'm getting a second rope into the tree. Okay? But if I'm in a situation where Nick is bleeding out, and I've got to get him down, I've got to get him down fast. Okay? And he's way out here now. So he had a canopy tie over here, but he's gone through some redirects. Now he's hanging way over here. So for me to get into that tree, I'd have to find some other way to anchor in to where I can maneuver over to him, where ideally I'd rather go straight to him. So just want you to understand.
Come up the tail of my line?
Oh, yeah.
I'm definitely leaving my foot of center on now.
Just want you to understand that this is absolutely not the first choice. But it is a choice and can be the right choice. So luckily,
I got a zinger of a question for you.
luckily he's not so far up the line that I just can't grab his foot of center and disengage it. And normally,
You know what? I'm going to go up just a little more, Rich, just to give you a little more headspace here.
okay. That's, yep, probably, yeah, actually, come down a little bit because I'm going to need some room above you. There you go.
Good?
Yep. Okay. So this is going to be interesting, seeing as you've got a 12-mile long bridge in that harness. No worries, though. Okie dokie.
You can tell this is not my harness because the bridge is so long.
So before I go
Bridge is
up
like
and do anything, I'm going to test my hitch so that it grabs me positively and immediately. Again, I'm more than happy to share my bourbon with you. I'm just not going to give it to you for that.
So I want to point something out here that is unique to the rope wrench, and as far as I know, the only commercially available product in mechanical would be the rope runner. Rich's ability to come up this weighted line, or for my system to be manipulated, is pretty awesome. You know, even with Rich's weight on here, I would still be able to go down because I'm on a rope wrench.
Yep.
And you can't really do that on any other system. Anything that puts a bend, a griever, even a D4. If I was up here on a D4 and you got on and I was suddenly capable of bringing myself, I wouldn't be able to.
Yep.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's an excellent point. The other beautiful thing I love about a rope wrench, now that we're talking about it, is let's say we're doing this style of rescue and something gets dislodged and some comes running down the rope. It's not going to hit my hitch. In a doubled rope scenario, anything can hit your hitch and your hitch is disengaged. Yeah. In this case, the rope wrench protects my hitch just by being above it and locked in. So all good points. Okay, so in this case, I'm going to send up to Nick as high as I can get it. We're pretty low down, so I'm just going to mimic this. Okay? Now you'll notice I put the rope to the side here. I wouldn't want that rope to be sitting on his crotch because eventually I'm going to rescue him and he may decide to come give me some payback if I cause some damage there. Okay? But it's better to be to the side for the time being. Now that's going to change in the not too distant future. So what I would like to do from here is I'm going to transfer from my rope wrench ascent to my D4. Now, could I have done this from the get-go? Sure. But let's say I had to go 40, 50 feet. Ideally, in that case, I would have started with the rope wrench and then transferred to the D4. Okay, so I'll get myself onto the D4. I'll step into my rope wrench so I can stand up on this. I can disconnect my rope wrench and I can sit back on my D4 and I'm good to go. And I'm going to disconnect all this stuff because I need to advance higher. Now, this is going to look messy at first. It's going to look weird. You're not going to like it. And I'm going to do this very slow so we can walk through it. But eventually this gets to become really fluid and really quick, which is again why I would use it in a scenario where I know that I've got a bleed out scenario and I have to move quickly. Okay? So here, now that I'm onto my D4, I will start ascending the rest of the way. And for that guy that asked earlier, you can do this with the rads. It really is not fun. It's just not that efficient.
First tree I ever cut for money, I did the whole thing on rads with a Petzl greenery, Rich.
Seriously?
Yeah, I mean, I was like, I did like the whole Kevin approach where I just was doing everything with rock climbing rope, and I mean, it was a horror story. I remember one of my first side jobs, our friction brake was just two carabiners held apart by two pieces of rock climbing rope, like 6 feet apart on the spar.
Good Lord.
And we just took the rigging line and wrapped it between the carabiners a bunch of times.
Eek.
Yeah, it worked.
Nice.
That's how I bought my first 460, was with that money from that job.
So what I'll need to do here is I actually do need to go higher. So I'll get my hand ascender above Nick. Back into my foot ascender.
Very slick.
And what I'm looking to do is I'm not going to go all the way up. I want to leave about 3 inches beneath his hitch. Okay? Okay. You'll see I stopped about 3 inches below his hitch. Okay? Gotten myself into a comfortable position, and I'm able to work with Nick. Clear his breathing passageway, all that stuff. Okay, good to go. Okay, so from here, what I need to do is I need to lift Nick off of his system. I need to put him onto me. Well, I'm on a 2-person load-rated device. So at this point, I can make that connection from him to the back side of my D4.
Is there a reason you couldn't just go straight to my bridge?
I could go straight to your bridge, yep, but I'm not going to. Question is, could I go straight to this bridge? The reason I'm going here is because this is where I want my lift point to be. So you're going to see in a second I'm going to start lifting you, and I'm going to want that to be basically from right in this spot.
Got it.
Okay. If I put this to your bridge, there's a good chance it's going to move side to side, which if I weren't controlling you with my legs would also happen. Okay. So from here, I'm going to take about an arm's length of rope. There he goes, just to be a bastard. I'm going to take about an arm's length of rope from beneath my D4. Okay. And I'm going to create an anchor there. And the reason for that is because I need to lift Nick, obviously. And the only way I'm going to be able to lift him is if I have an anchor to him. So we'll go there, okay? And there's a reason why I left this amount. You'll see in a second. Now what I can do, now, if I had a hauler beaner, this would all be easy. I could hook my hauler beaner to this, I could hook it to Nick, I could just laugh my way through lifting him up, and good to go. Hauler beaner is a beautiful piece of equipment. But I want to show you the more difficult way to do it, which is actually the more fun way to do it, which is a way that you really should learn anyway, because you don't often have all that equipment with you. So here, just using what I already have. I don't have to use this hand ascender. I could use my webbing sling if I wanted. All right? But I'm going to run that rope down to my foot ascender. Okay? And I'm going to get my knee up as high as I can comfortably get it up. So now what I'm going to do is what's called a body weight counter lever. I'm going to stand up on my leg. As I'm standing up on my leg, I'm going to pull up on his harness here. And this could be interesting considering my shoulder, but we'll find out. So as I stand up, I'm also lifting up.
Oh my gosh, look at that.
Okay. And eventually, you see that I can actually go, now that I'm holding all the weight on my legs, I can actually go hands-free here. Okay? So, kind of hard to see, but I've taken the weight off of his system, so now I can unclip his system. You see how I'm essentially hands-free on this?
I'm doing my best to show him, Rich, but we're kind of twisted the wrong direction.
Yeah, it always happens. So normally I would just leave all this on the line and not worry about it, so if you want to hold that. Okay? So now what I'm going to do is come down to my D4, and I'm going to take as much slack out as I can from beneath my D4. Okay? So what that's done is that's reduced the amount that I have to lower him down now. Whoa. So now when I sit back on the system, my D4 will engage. Okay? Nick will engage to me on my D4, and I'm in a nice clean position to let go. Here we go.
There's an ab burner laying back like that.
Well, normally you would have that chest set up. So I could have just hooked in.
I'm not coming to one of your classes without a chest on.
I'd highly recommend it. So, that looked a little ugly, sure. I'm here to tell you it's actually quite clean. And you see what happened. All I did is I created the anchor here. The reason why I left some rope is to give me room so that I could then pull out that slack instead of having to lower Nick all the way down. And again, the control I had of Nick the whole time was pretty good. You can very easily, when you extend your leg, lift his bridge, keep your leg locked, and I can hold his whole weight just with my leg, which is a beautiful thing. And you'll notice I also didn't really have to bypass my victim. All I had to do was put that hand ascender up there. Did I have to use a hand ascender? No. I could have used a webbing sling, no problem. But I didn't have to get my whole body past the victim. So here we go, nice clean setup. Now, of course I could at this point take another sling and just make a second connection point to my victim, because why not? Again, if it's easy for me to add safety in, you may as well. Okay? So now he's connected to the descender, he's also connected to the bridge. So now I can lower my victim, controlling it the whole way. And again, I can leave him fully suspended and walk myself out of it.
I'm buying a dummy, Rich.
I've got a dummy brain.
I'm buying a dummy.
So, yes, there's a lot going on there. It seemed like there was a lot going on there. In reality, it's a very simple process. I send to my victim, transfer to my D4, connect to my victim once I'm on the two-person load-rated device. Then I need to create an anchor from beneath my D4 so that I have something to anchor to my victim, route it up through another device so I can stomp as I'm lifting, use my body weight to lift his body weight, gets him off of his system, disconnect, I take out the slack on my D4, and we're both ready to go down. Piece of cake, right? No worries. Again, that is not the way that I would do every rescue. You'd want to approach it as the rescue comes, see what I've got to work with. If I can very easily get a second line in, I'm going to do that. Even better, I'm going to plan ahead for myself, and I'm always going to have an access line in the tree, just so I can avoid this type of thing. That way I can just go right at the line, hook in, and come right down, basically. So, piece of cake. Ideally, you avoid this, but I'm here to tell you it's pretty fun to practice, too. So, any questions on any of that? There might be a question or three. Yes, sir. Oh, questions are coming.
Mark Smith has a question.
Yes, sir.
Can you demonstrate a method to upright an unresponsive victim? In most aerial rescue demonstrations, it's not covered.
Okay.
Not me, though.
I mean, we sort of talked about it. The question was to get a victim upright. Well, again, especially in a stationary rope scenario, typically your victim's going to have some sort of sternal anchor, whether it be an actual 5-point harness or it be a chesty. 4SRT makes one. All these guys make different setups. You can just take an anchor from that and run it straight to the rope, and that'll get your victim in an upright position. Could I use my lanyard around his shoulder and his back? Sure. And then you can adjust that in as well. There's a lot of different ways you can do it. It's really going to depend on the actual scenario. You could bring a webbing sling with you just to prepare for that, and you could set your webbing sling basically as a shoulder harness as well in case the climber doesn't have one. So really, there's a lot of different ways of doing that. Anything else? Next question, when's this idiot going home? What the hell's wrong with this?
Yeah, we definitely want to finish off if there are more questions. Obviously, we can't answer them all, but we picked the ones that we like the most. So if you have any more questions, dump them in here. If you want your question answered and you jam on the like button or the heart thing, there's probably a better chance because we like seeing those go across the screen. Mark Moski has a good question. Mark's question is, would your bridge be rated for 2 people pulling 2 directions?
Ooh, excellent question. Would my bridge be rated for 2 people pulling in different directions? That is a really good question, Mark. And if anybody knows anything about rescue, it's Mark. Good Lord.
And if anybody knows anything about rope bridges, it's you.
Yeah, nice one. And true. So, yeah, that's obviously something that's going to be very important. So, depending on the harness that you're using, this particular harness, I've got 2 separate anchor points that are actually anchored into 2 separate spots. This is a Z359 rated harness. So they're tested for drop load with certain masses, and typically it will exceed 2 persons. So if it's an ANSI rated harness, you can feel pretty comfortable knowing that because the other thing you'll bear in mind here, during that pick-off rescue, you noticed everything was relatively static. There wasn't anything dropping, falling, flying. It was a case of fluid control the whole time without being exposed to big falls. So because it's very static, I'm not actually putting much load onto the various components. Nick doesn't weigh a whole lot. I'm getting bigger, unfortunately. But in a static environment, really, we're not putting an awful lot of load on the overall system. So excellent question, Mark, and you would definitely want to make sure that you've got an ANSI-rated harness to handle that type of thing.
I had a couple requests to show, have you just kind of go through how you load test your hitch again.
Okay.
I think that's a really important step, and people seem very interested to hear about that.
It is the key, most important step in both doubled rope and singled rope climbing. Where's my other setup? There it is.
Bottom of this. While Rich is setting that up, I'll remind everyone, you've seen the message on the bottom of your screen maybe, but with the code ISC Live, you can get 20% off all ISC products. So big thanks to ISC for helping us out with that and coming and sending Rich. And if you like any of the stuff you've seen here, you can get it all at Tree Stuff. ISC Live, 20% off, and that's good through the 28th. That's Sunday night. So yeah, if you like any of that stuff, hit it up for sure.
Excellent. Thank you, Nick. So this question actually, there's lots of answers to it, obviously. How do I load test my hitch? Now, I'll take this a step back. Within the rope wrench climbing system, within the UIM, it explains that you have to have a hitch that will hold your weight positively and immediately. What we specifically did not want to do is specify the hitch that you're going to use, because every one of us is different, okay? Every one of our climbing styles is different. Your typical preference in a hitch cord might be a different diameter than I prefer. Your host line might be different than I prefer. So in our feeling, it was not, we did not want to go in the direction of stipulating an exact hitch to use. Now, we had to do that to get early acceptance at ISA competitions, but we were able to prove that this system perfectly regulates a hitch. If I can test it to make sure that it's going to hold positively and immediately without the rope wrench, then there will be no issues with that hitch during the climb. So it doesn't matter what my hitch is, and it doesn't matter what your hitch is, so don't even bother looking at what I'm tying here. The method of testing would be to set it up as if you were doing a doubled rope setup, okay, without the rope wrench engaged at all. I'll hook that onto my connection point on my harness. I'll have one hand above the system, I'll have one hand below the system. And the idea is that I'm going to hold on up here, I'm going to draw the rope up from beneath the system, and then I'm going to let go. I'm not going to assist my hitch at all in grabbing. I want it to grab on its own, and I want it to grab positively and immediately, and I want it to do it every time I do it. So when I test it, you see that there was no slide on that. It grabbed and it held right off the bat. Okay, I'm going to test it again. Okay. Now, of course, what some people like to do is to tighten up the hitch as much as humanly possible before they do that testing. What I would suggest, listen, man, this is your life on the line, okay? The beauty of the rope wrench is it takes so much friction off of the hitch and regulates it that I can actually climb with a more aggressive hitch here and it'll be smoother. Often, not to pick on double rope climbing, but often double rope climbing, because you have so much friction involved as you're going around limbs, climbers often will tie a looser hitch. They're pre-compensating for that friction that's going to come. The problem with that is when they're no longer with all that friction and they've got that really loose hitch, they cannot guarantee it's going to grab positively and immediately every time. So what I suggest to you, tie your hitch, make it even more aggressive than you would normally, make sure it grabs positively and immediately. Oh, you saw that one fell a little bit, test it a few more times. That's rock solid.
Can the rope wrench be used to provide extra friction for double rope oriented mechanical devices? You know, obviously the question is, can it be used with a Petzl zigzag? But I've also had people ask to use it with ART products. And
Yep.
What do you think about that?
So the official stance on that is climb on your equipment as it stipulates in the UIM. In the Petzl UIM, apparently there's a slight little loophole issue going on where people are saying that it shows that there is a way that you can climb on a zigzag stationary rope if extra friction is added, and the question then becomes, could this be the friction that's added? I would send you to Petzl on that. Okay, I can't answer for their products. In terms of interaction with ART products, with other products, we have not specifically tested with that. So again, I'm not going to condone any of those. It's not because we don't like these other companies. Look, ART makes excellent products. Okay, the idea of being able to use our products with theirs is something that I see. If people wanted to do that testing, we'd be happy to be part of that. But currently, as it is, you must go along with the UIMs. So as far as I know, no other device out there, mechanical, condones the use with the rope wrench. So user instruction manual. That piece of paper, that booklet sometimes that you open up your thing and toss, that's the thing you're tossing is the UIM typically.
Can you tell us about any secret projects that ISC is working on? Potentially, I've heard rumors of purpose-built rigging wrenches and other things. Can you whet our appetite a little bit?
Stuff in the pipeline. Well, actually, we have some incredibly exciting stuff in the pipeline that I can't release today, but will be releasing shortly. But
Nobody's watching now, so you can say it's okay.
oh, no, nobody's watching now. Perfect. One of the devices we're really excited about is the D4 Pro, which is the D4 without the panic feature. Now, this is not going to be something that's going to be heavily used within ARB, although guys like Chip Hildreth have been clamoring for this forever. This is designed really with geoface technicians and window washers in mind, where they're doing a lot of straight descents and they just eat through devices like nobody's business. So this one does not have the panic. It's got a hard anodized outer side plate to increase the overall longevity, and the hardened stainless bobbin and cam. So it's just built to be completely and utterly abused in those environments where they get abused. So this is one we're really excited about. We've just released our rigging hubs, which yep, you'll be getting these at Tree Stuff soon. We have 3 separate sizes. These are specifically designed to be able to accept multiple carabiners per aperture, different than other devices that are out there. This one is not designed to have a rope running through the center, but there are some very nice features in terms of auto equalizing, in terms of the overall strength ratings on these is absolutely through the roof. These are primarily designed for rescue, fire rescue, technical rescue, that sort of thing. 2 more? Yeah, oh, sorry. Was I actually doing that? Whoops. Sorry, not sure what I was doing there. But anyway, these are out now, or available now. We do have some big things coming this year. Nick alluded to a potential purpose-built rigging rope wrench application. I can say that is something that we've been long at work on with Kevin Bingham, and we've come up with a rather interesting, really nicely performing device. So that's not too far off. We're in the final stages of prototyping on that and field testing, so that will be in the very near future. Lots of other stuff that'll just bore you as it deals with other disciplines. Okay. Anything else? Well, I could keep talking if you want. Believe me, it's never a hard thing to do. Getting me to shut up is usually the bigger problem. For those of you who are interested in maybe looking at a more in-depth version of all this type of stuff, as well as especially setting up stationary work with the rope wrench, I'm more than happy to come up and do that type of thing for you. So just reach out to these guys and let them know you want it, and we'll make it happen.
Yeah, he'll pay you to come, too.
Well,
it's awesome.
Not sure.
What do you want me to do? For this?
Oh, for the test.
The test, yeah. So, okay, Carson's reminding me, as usual, of what to do. Kale's going to post the link for the CEU test.
Yep.
As always, a big thanks to the ISA for supporting us on that. You do need to get a passing score on the test, so make sure that you take it seriously, and you'll get your CEUs. We give people a little window to answer it, and it takes us a week or 2 to assimilate the answers, and then we send it off to the ISA, and then it's in their hands for how long it takes for you guys to see those. We always get a lot of email requests, when will I see them? We do it as fast as we can, and the ISA always gets them to you, so just be patient, and if you have any questions, you can always contact the ISA too, and ask them, and they can usually give you a better answer than we can, because we just don't know. I do want to remind people, we're giving away this 550 XP that I think works. It is as is, right, Rich?
It is.
So if you get it and it doesn't work, it's still yours. Whoever donates the most money to the Fallen Families Fund via the Tree Stuff website tonight is going to get this mailed to them tomorrow. Doesn't smell like it's ever had gas. It's completely clean. I think it's brand new. This is what you get. No bar, no chain, no instructions, no warranty.
Nothing else for parts is pretty nice.
Yeah, you don't get anything except for this, and there's no returns or exchanges, or you don't get another one if this doesn't work, but I think it does work. So make a donation to the Fallen Families Fund on treestuff.com. It's right in the hot stuff section. The first thing that you see there is where you donate. So if you just go to hot stuff, you'll see. Make a donation. It's for $1. You just change the quantity to whatever you want, and whoever makes the biggest donation tonight will get this. And all the donations go straight to families in need or climbers affected by disability. 100% of all the administrative costs and running the charity, what I get paid, all that stuff, that's not paid for by the company. So you can feel really good knowing if you donate $100, that $100 is going to go in its entirety to someone who needs it, that got injured or killed on the job, unfortunately. So,
Perfect.
Rich, thank you so much.
Cheers, my friend.
Please stay tuned to the Facebook page. We intend to do, upwards of 10 of these webinars. If you like them, send an email to media@treestuff.com. Let us know. As always, like, share, subscribe, do all that good stuff so that you get notified the next time that we're live. I'd like to thank our team. Cale Royer, back on the desk. Carson, give me a pan. And let's give Carson a thank. Can I get this camera turned on here? That's Carson and his very high-quality hard hat. Big thanks to these guys. Without their technology whizness, we wouldn't be able to figure any of this stuff out or make this happen. So huge thanks to those two. Big thanks to you, Rich, and to all of you guys for watching. We hope to catch you next time.
Cheers. Excellent.